Chapter 141, Matryoshka Sealing Technique. Lucian's ice spell struck true, freezing Horvat solid in mid-flight. Lucian, the nesting doll. Now! Balthazar barked, his voice crackling with urgency. Lucian tore the carved wooden Matryoshka from his belt and flung it into Balthazar's waiting hand. As Balthazar began the incantation, the air around them shimmered with power. The enchantress, though her features were youthful, she had lived centuries, crumbled into a fine silver dust. The grains drifted outward, settling onto the doll and forming a new, flawless layer, bearing her likeness. No sooner had that image sealed than Balthazar pivoted to the frozen Horvats. His voice rose in a second invocation, and Horvats's body disintegrated into a cascade of golden sand. It swirled around the doll, extending the outer shell and imprinting his face beside hers. With the final word uttered, Balthazar relaxed, the doll now layered too deep with his victim's essences. Lucian watched, heart pounding. The Book of Morgana contained no sealing arts like this. This was pure Merlin magic. To bind powerful foes safely until the moment he chose to unleash them, it was a revelation. Lucian vowed then and there to master the Matryoshka sealing technique for himself. Balthazar carefully stowed the enchanted dolls away and gave Lucian a solemn nod. Thank you, Lucian. If it weren't for you, we never would have retrieved them so smoothly or sealed them so quickly. Lucian lifted an eyebrow. Now isn't the time for thanks. We have to move. Sirens wailed in the distance. Nodding to one another, Lucian seized Balthazar's arm, and with a powerful burst of wind magic, they shot skyward above the city. A moment later, they scooped up David, who had been crouching on a neighboring rooftop, and dropped back down onto the building's flat surface. Lucian brushed a strand of dark hair from his face as he addressed David. You've just seen a fraction of what's out there. There are countless other sorcerers who'd love nothing more than for Morgana's seal to be broken, so they can rule the world. We won today, but unless Morgana stays imprisoned, there's no guarantee we'll win the next battle. I want you to think very carefully about where you stand. Will you join us, David? Will you become a true magician? Balthazar held up the dragon ring, its sapphire glinting in the moonlight. This ring chose me, he said softly, hope shining in his eyes. I believe it could choose you too. From just out of sight, Lucian sent a quick voice message. David, magic is unpredictable and incredibly rewarding. I think you'll come to love it. David stared at the ring, torn between the world he's known and the power now within his reach. The sirens below grew louder, and with them, the promise of a new destiny. I still believe it's vital for everyone to master their own strength, Balthazar said, turning to David. If your family or friends ever find themselves in danger, you won't be left standing by helplessly. Lucian, his panda form perched beside them, nodded eagerly. And let's not forget, he added with a grin, capable guys are a lot more popular with the ladies. David hesitated for only a moment. The promise of power and security warred with his doubts, but the thrill of learning real magic won out. With a steady hand, he reclaimed the dragon ring from Balthazar's open palm. All right, he said, I promise. I'll help you restore me to human form. Excellent, Balthazar beamed. Now let's find somewhere private. I'll teach you every spell in Merlin's grimoire and forge you into a true archmage. Lucian let out an excited squeak. So long as David remained in this world with Balthazar and Lucian, the boy would have free access to Merlin's magic. With Morgana's threat hanging over them and the bond they'd all formed in battle, Balthazar would never back out of his promise. David's newfound magical prowess would prove crucial when the time came to break Morgana's seal, and Lucian's panda form would have two indispensable roles: to assist in that final confrontation and to stand guard over their fellowship until the very end. Lucian's plan was simple, but ambitious. First, he would devote himself to deep meditation, raising his magic level as high as possible. Because all his clones shared the same physique and abilities, any breakthrough by one would instantly benefit them all. If even a single clone reached level 500 and attained immortality, that boon would ripple back to Lucian himself and to every other clone. And as his magic level climbed, so too would his magical capacity and the potency of every spell he cast. Second, he would throw himself wholeheartedly into learning every spell in this world alongside Balthazar, David, and the others, leaving no incantation of Merlin's or Morgana's magic unstudied. Even after mastering all local magic, Lucian could continue meditating as a pure practice clone, hinting at future research into otherworldly sorcery. After all, aside from Morgana's occasional meddling, this world was safe enough to allow a steady, uninterrupted course of study. "I know just the place," David said with a grin. "My professor introduced me to an old subway turnaround station that's been abandoned for years. It's spacious, concealed, and perfect for conducting physical and magical experiments." With their strategy set, David led Balthazar and Lucian to that hidden station. There, in the dimly lit tunnels and forgotten platforms, their formal life of magical study and the next stage of Lucian's journey truly began. Lucian, the magically engineered clone drawn from the fairy tale world, had taken to the guild library like a fish to water, drilling himself in basic transmutation magic. To help his fellow mages learn faster, he etched a Morgana ring into the library's open floor, enchanting it so that anyone who stood within its bounds would experience crystal-clear concentration and accelerated comprehension. In theory, the circle was available to every fairy tale wizard. In practice, only Levi ever bothered to sit in it for long study sessions. "Lucian, this is incredible," Levi said one evening, straightening his Fengyong reading glasses. He closed the spellbook in his lap and stood. "Between your magic circle and these glasses, I'm picking up complex incantations in half the time." A soft glow still curled around the Morgana ring as Levi rose. The Fengyong glasses let him skim text at lightning speed, but deep understanding still demanded steady effort, an effort that the ring's enchantment made remarkably efficient. Levi glanced at the clock on the far wall. "It's already 11 o'clock. We should head back to the dorms soon." "Right," Lucian replied, pushing himself up from the ring. He gave the glowing sigils one last appreciative look as they faded. "Let's pack up and call it a night." With their notes tucked away, the two mages left the library in silence, the Morgana ring's soft radiance slowly dimming behind them. The streets of Magnolia were unusually calm these days. Fairy Tale's recent S-level mission, undertaken in secret by Natsu, Lucy, and Happy, had turned into smooth sailing once Gray and Urza joined the team. Rumor had it they'd faced a demon even more powerful than the cursed flute creature from before, and that Gray had run into his old master, the famed ice modeling mage. "Ready to go?" Lucian asked, sliding open the library's heavy doors. "I'm guessing Mirajane and the others have already headed back." Levy slipped her books into her satchel and grinned. Sarasuk and Dorel, sprawled out on the Guildhall table, stirred at the sound. Neither could stomach another hour of dusty tomes, but they always waited for Levy before heading back to the dormitory. Levy gave each a gentle shake until they blinked awake. The three of them, plus the little guild cat, locked the massive oak doors behind them and set off down the lantern-lined avenue toward the town center. No sooner had they disappeared around the corner than a tall figure emerged in the doorway. Jet-black hair fell past his broad shoulders, and a dozen silver hoops glinted in each ear. He offered a slow, confident smile and raised a gauntleted fist. In that instant, iron seemed to gather in the very air around him. "Iron Dragon Slayer magic! Iron Dragon Staff!" he boomed, and the world trembled as molten metal coalesced at his command. Chapter 142, A Midnight Assault. Third update. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Lucian's new villa in Magnolia City. He stretched, blinking at the gleaming furnishings around him, a far cry from the cramped lodgings he'd known before. A few weeks ago, using the finest magic wand he'd ever owned, he had crafted an advanced piece of spatial equipment. When he sold it to a prominent magic shop, the profit was so enormous, he'd immediately invested in this luxurious single-family estate. After a quick wash, Lucian summoned a swirl of cooking magic in the kitchen. In minutes, eggs sizzled, steam curled from a stack of golden pancakes, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. He ate alone, but contentedly. Breakfast was always his moment of calm before the day's work. By mid-morning, he was out in the villa's spacious courtyard, wand in hand. This was Lucian's routine as a fairy tale mage. Dawn spent practicing spells at home, noon at the Guildhall sharing a meal and fresh gossip with friends, and afternoons and evenings lost among the dusty tomes of Magnolia's grand library. "Li Huo," he intoned, voice steady. A flicker of azure flame ignited above the training stones. Lucian's eyes narrowed as he guided the fire through a series of precise motions, striking invisible targets he'd placed around the courtyard. Gradually, he dialed up the power, watching the blue blaze swell and coil with controlled fury. The moment it threatened to break free of his will, he snapped his wand downward, quashing the surge. Mastering Fire Spell was no small feat. Its raw power could devastate friend and foe alike. But Lucian welcomed the challenge. With each burst of flame he tamed, he edged closer to true mastery, ready for whatever threats might emerge in the dead of night. The fire curse is so potent that no ordinary water spell can quench it. It only dies out when there's nothing left to burn. In the right hands, Grindelwald's for instance, it's said the entire city of Paris could be reduced to cinders. With his top-quality wand, Lucian could unleash comparable devastation if he chose to cast the fire curse without restraint. Yet he still lags behind Grindelwald in sheer control. Lucian can dial the flames up or down at will when he holds back, but at full power the inferno takes on a life of its own, only fading once it has nothing left to consume. He'd been practicing that spell non-stop until nearly noon. Then, pushing open the door with a calm, steady motion, he spread his wings and lifted into the air, heading for the guild house on the edge of the East Forest. As he drifted past the cathedral, about to bank toward the guild, he saw Natsu, Lucy, Urza, Gray, and the cheerful Happy barreling down the road in his direction, their faces etched with urgency. Chapter 7. The Guild Under Siege. Hey Urza, how was your mission? You finally back? Lucian touched down lightly beside her, brushing dust from his cloak. He'd just returned from the S-rank assignment on the Cursed Island, a grueling week that had stretched on far too long. His boots still carried the island's salt and ash, but the familiar bustle of Magnolia City felt comforting. Urza's eyes were sharp as ever when she answered. I'm back, but, Lucian, have you heard what happened to the guild? Her question snapped him to attention. Around them, townsfolk whispered in hurried tones as they pressed past, glancing at the massive iron barricades now sealing off the Fairy Tale Guild Hall. Lucian's heart lurched. Attacked? He echoed, stunned. I was fine when I left last night. No way someone dared strike Fairy Tale. Without waiting for another word, he vaulted onto a nearby lamppost and sprinted toward the guild, even as Urza and the others hurried to keep pace behind him. From a distance, the once proud crest above the entrance had been defaced, replaced by rusting bars and burn marks. They forced their way through the makeshift blockade and entered the main hall. Lucian froze. Tables lay splintered, shattered glass littered the floor, and scorch marks ringed the pillars where magic had erupted in uncontrolled bursts. The air tasted of fear and ashes. He swallowed hard, scanning the devastation. Fairy Tale was one of the kingdom's strongest guilds, led by Master Makarov of the Holy Ten. To attack them was practically unheard of, practically suicidal. Lucian's fists clenched. Who could be mad enough to risk their life attacking Fairy Tale? He muttered. Beside him, Urza's armor was scuffed, but her expression was resolute. We'll find out, she said quietly, and we'll stop them. Lucian took a deep breath. The guild he'd sworn to protect lay in ruins, and now it was up to him and his comrades to uncover the culprit and set things right. As he stepped deeper into the shattered hall, a single thought raced through his mind. Whoever did this, they were in for a reckoning. Lucian climbed down the narrow stairwell and emerged into the makeshift headquarters tucked beside the basement library. Guildmaster Makarov and a handful of mages were already gathered in the dimly lit storage room, crates and barrels stacked around them. Makarov, reclining on an overturned crate with a half-empty goblet of wine in hand, looked up and broke into a broad grin. Lucian, you've finally arrived, he greeted. We've been waiting for you to help get the guild back on its feet. Urza stood nearby, arms folded over her armor. When Lucian gave her a curt nod, she allowed herself a small smile. Perfect timing, she said. Once Lucian inspects the damage, we'll be able to move back upstairs. Before Lucian could respond, Natsu dashed into the room, sparks flickering at his nostrils. Master, what's taking so long? Why are we still camped down here? He stamped the floor impatiently, as though willing the guild's battered walls to rebuild themselves. Makarov waved a hand, his voice soothing. Easy, Fire Dragon. It was just some prank. Nothing more. A bunch of cowards from the Ghost Guild snuck in and trashed a few tables and chairs after we'd all left. Childish mischief, really. We can fix it in no time. Lucian's brow furrowed. The Ghost Guild? You mean Phantom's Reign? That's one of the strongest guilds in the kingdom, almost on Fairy Tale's level. Why would they bother with a stunt like this? Makarov's smile faded, replaced by a shadow of concern. He set his wine aside and looked Lucian in the eye. Exactly. That's what worries me. They struck quickly, left no clues. It feels less like a prank and more like a message. I want you to take a closer look, see if there's something we've missed. Urza stepped forward. I'll help. Between the two of us, we'll have the guild restored in no time and find out what the Ghost Guild is up to. Natsu cracked his knuckles. And if they dare show their faces around here again, they'll regret it. Lucian surveyed the room, the battered furniture, splintered wood, and the worried faces of his comrades. He nodded resolutely. All right, let's get to work. But once we've patched things up, we need to find out why Ghost is picking on us, and fast. Lucian watched from the edge of the Fairy Tale Guild Hall as the rumors swirled around him. It was common knowledge that the founders of Ghost Ruler and Fairy Tale, Joseph Pola and Makarov, respectively, had clashed long before either organization was officially formed. That old grudge never really died, and neither guild had ever been on friendly terms. Today, Ghost Ruler was under the command of Joseph Pola, one of the famed 10 Holy Wizards. 6 years ago, at a grand magical summit, Pola had challenged Makarov to a duel to decide once and for all which guild was supreme. He lost, and in his pride, he refused ever again to attend another guild meeting. Since then, Ghost Ruler had swelled to more than 10 times Fairy Tale's size. Their main headquarters alone boasted several times as many mages, and they maintained over a dozen branches nationwide. At the top of their ranks stood the 4 great elementalists, all S-class wizards, and beneath them, an Iron Dragon Slayer, whose strength was said to eclipse anyone else, in the guild. Lucian's heart pounded at the thought of facing such overwhelming numbers. No, I can't accept this, Natsu thundered, slamming a nearby crate into splinters with a single punch. Shards of wood scattered across the floor. I swear I'll tear their guild to pieces, or I'll never forgive myself for standing by. Urza stepped forward, placing both hands on Natsu's shoulders. Calm down, Natsu, she said, her voice steady despite the anger shining in her eyes. She knew how to hold back her friend's fire without dousing it completely. Lucian took a steadying breath. He admired Fairy Tale's unbreakable spirit, but he also felt the weight of the challenge ahead. If Ghost Ruler moved against them, they would need every ounce of unity and every ounce of power they could muster. All right, that's enough for now. Lucian, please help with the repairs. Master Makarov stretched, hopped off the table, and muttered, I've had too much to drink. Excuse me for a moment, before heading off to find a restroom. Once he was out of earshot, Mirajane stepped forward to calm the others. Natsu, don't be so hard on the master. He's actually agitated, more than you realize. It's just that the Magic Council forbids guilds from fighting one another. If this escalates, they could even force us to disband. Damn them, Natsu growled, balling his fists. They started it! Several guild members shifted uneasily, clearly sharing his resentment, but knowing there was little they could do. Lucian said nothing. Instead, he floated up to the first floor and wove his fingers through the air, casting a repair spell. Cracked walls mended, splintered beams realigned, and tattered banners resealed themselves. Within minutes, the guild hall looked as good as new. Lucian landed, brushing a stray lock of hair from his face. He had no desire to defy the master's orders. If a full-blown guild war ever broke out, he'd stand shoulder to shoulder with Fairy Tale. It would be the perfect chance to test the advanced magic he'd been mastering. But until then, he'd focus on his studies. Disrupting his training over a minor skirmish ran contrary to everything he stood for: discipline, reason, and steady progress. The repairs on the guild hall were finally complete, and by midday, everyone drifted back from the warehouse to relax and refuel. After a quick lunch, Lucian made his way to the library with Levi to continue their studies. Though the ancient books were familiar, Levi's brow remained furrowed. Something clearly weighed on her mind. As dusk settled, the members scattered on their own errands. Lucian and Levi, lost in translation exercises and spell diagrams, barely noticed how late it had grown. When they finally emerged into the cool evening air, the lanterns in the courtyard were already lit. Unperturbed by the hour, they headed out together. Their route took them along the winding paths of Nongkou Park. Cherry blossoms drifted like pale snow in the lamplight, and the only sound was the soft rustle of leaves. But just a few steps past the east gate, a lone figure stepped into their path, his long hair gleaming silver under the park lamps. "Hey, aren't you two wizards from Fairy Tale?" he called, voice carrying a challenge. Levi stopped short and narrowed her eyes, shadowed by suspicion. Lucian's hand drifted toward his satchel, alert to the tense energy in the stranger's stance. Beneath that calm question, Lucian sensed raw power and an unmistakable trace of hostility. He glanced at Levi. Whatever this was about, it wasn't going to be a simple conversation. Chapter 143, Lucian, Iron Dragon's Nemesis. Fourth update. Remember my name, Lord of Ghosts, Iron Dragon Slayer Mage Gajiel. Gajiel's long hair whipped around him as he sneered, then in the blink of an eye he charged Lucian's small party, 3 mages and a cat. "You're the ones who attacked our guild. Allow me to teach you a lesson." Sarusuk drew upon his magic foot technique, surging forward with blinding speed. He leapt into the air and delivered a thunderous kick aimed at Gajiel's elongated face. Falcon Tianxiang, but Gajiel didn't flinch. In an instant, his skin turned black as iron, and he met Sarusuk's blow head-on. Instead of staggering, he held his ground, and sent Sarusuk tumbling backward across the ground. Ah! The reversal was shocking. Gajiel remained perfectly steady, while Sarusuk, clearly outmatched, lay sprawled. Before Sarusuk could rise, Dorel and Lebi sprang into action. With seamless teamwork, Dorel scattered enchanted seeds onto the battlefield, and Lebi wove a quick incantation. From the soil sprang thick, writhing vines that snaked around Gajiel's legs, binding him in place. As soon as Rebi finished inscribing the word stone, a massive boulder materialized and hurtled straight at Gajiel, who was tangled in vines. "Iron Dragon Slayer magic, Iron Dragon sword," Gajiel bellowed. But the sword and the stones posed no threat. In an instant, his right arm transformed into a spinning, serrated steel blade, shredding rock and vines like paper. Before Dorel and Lebi could launch another spell, Gajiel was already looming over them. "Taste this," he snarled, raising his blade for the killing blow. Dorel and Lebi's faces went pale. They knew they stood no chance against Gajiel, the Iron Dragon Slayer mage of the Ghost Ruler, whose power rivaled even an S-class mage. Just as the steel fang was about to descend, a firm voice rang out. "Stop!" Gajiel froze solid mid-swing. From a nearby ledge, Lucian, who had been observing the fight, spread his broad wings and descended between the combatants. "Iron Dragon Slayer," Lucian said, his tone icily calm, "your entire body, your magic itself, smells of metal." He then turned to Dorel and Lebi. "You two, take Salusuk and fall back, now." "I can't hold him down much longer," Lucian warned, his silver fur bristling as he focused the swirling magnetic field at his feet. Had their assailant been any other S-class mage in the Ghost Rulers, Lucian would have scooped up Lebi and raced back to the Fairy Tale dorms. Wand in hand, he wouldn't dream of facing someone like Urza. But facing Gajiel, the Iron Dragon Slayer wrapped in a living metal aura, Lucian felt unshaken. "Lucian, watch out!" Lebi shouted. She and Dorel yanked their dazed comrade Salusuk away from the fray. They had always thought Lucian awkward in a fight. To see him pin an S-class mage, without even chanting an incantation, left them stunned. Gajiel grunted as he tried to rise. His boots scraped the stone floor, but invisible restraints bound his arms and legs. He flashed Lucian a dark, amused grin. "Heh, didn't expect a cat to wield such peculiar magic." Lucian's tail twitched. "Magic or not, you're not going anywhere." With a roar, Gajiel's Iron Dragon Slayer magic surged outward in a blistering pulse. Steel fragments rattled and clattered as Lucian's magnetic bonds groaned under the strain. Then, with a thunderous crack, they shattered. Gajiel rose to his full height, metal flecks cascading from his scales. His chest heaved with exertion, eyes blazing with renewed ferocity. Lucian's silver gaze hardened. The next clash between them was inevitable. "Go to hell!" Lucian snarled. Even slowed by his magnetic field, Gajiel's Iron Dragon sword came crashing down with bone-jarring force, deadly enough that any ordinary mage would have scrambled to safety. "Watch out, Lucian!" Delibi and the other 3 shouted, already weaving spells to shield him. But Lucian didn't flinch. Instead, he slammed his cat claw gauntlet to the earth and thrust his palms skyward. Every magnetic line that had been ninning Gajeel now flipped direction, blasting the S-level powerhouse off his feet like a human rocket. With a thunderous roar, Gajeel shot upward, finally coming to an abrupt halt 20 meters above the courtyard. In the past year, Lucian's magnetokinesis had blossomed into a 1,000-pound force. Among mutants, that placed him firmly at third tier, insufficient to lock down an S-level fighter, but more than enough to launch him clear out of range. High above, Gajeel's eyes burned with fury as he dangled, suspended by invisible steel. Below, Lucian tightened his grip on the gauntlet, ready for the next move. Gajeel hovered helplessly in midair. No wind stirred beneath him, no currents to support his weight. His normally ironclad body offered no leverage, and most of his strength felt forcibly leached away. What kind of magic was this? He glared up at the small cat-like figure drifting beside him. A solemn frown creased his brow. Under ordinary circumstances, any levitation or air control spell would register on his senses. He'd feel the magical eddies and either dodge or shatter the effect with his dragon-slaying power. But now there was nothing. No arcane signature, no fluctuating aura, not even the faintest trace of a spell. He'd simply been struck and bound midair, with no warning and no obvious vulnerability to exploit. His legs kicked and his arms flailed, but he couldn't break free, couldn't move an inch. For the first time in a long while, Gajeel found himself utterly on the back foot. All right, then. Time for a last-ditch gamble. He squared his gaze on Lucian overhead, drew in a steady breath, and let his cheeks balloon with air. Lucian's chest heaved as he soared into the air, every ounce of his Dragon Slayer magic gathering behind clenched jaws. Iron Dragon Slayer magic! Roar of the Iron Dragon! He roared, ready to unleash a torrent of metallic fury at the tiny cat-like mage who'd seized control of his limbs. But before the blast could form, his opponent flashed a smug grin. Not so fast, Gajeel taunted, fingers crackling with magnetism. In an instant, invisible iron strings snaked through Lucian's body, yanking him off balance. Mid-leap, Lucian felt himself twist helplessly, spinning head over heels until he lay perfectly flat in the sky, spine rigid, face turned upward toward the clouds. Now horizontal and unable even to locate his foe, Lucian struggled in vain, every muscle locked by Gajeel's magnetic hold. He tried to peer downward, to claw free and aim true, but it was too late. With a final guttural scream, "Iron Dragon Roar!" the powerful stream of iron-laced energy shot straight into the firmament, dissipating harmlessly in the blue expanse. The wind died. The sky stayed empty. And far below, Gajeel laughed, untouched, leaving Lucian's most fearsome attack echoing uselessly into the heavens. Lucian shot beneath Gajeel in one fluid motion, his magnetism flaring to seize control of the larger man's muscles and pin him in midair. Gajeel thrashed, but couldn't break free. Pulling a top-grade magic wand from his cloak, Lucian leveled it at Gajeel's back and intoned, "Faint!" Chapter 144. Lucian, I'm really not that strong, 5th update. The moment the sleeping spell hit Gajeel, his eyelids began to droop. But as a dragon slayer, his body possessed draconic resilience, enormous innate magic power, ironclad will, and formidable resistance to most spells. Just as his eyes fluttered shut, they snapped open again. Lucian remained unconcerned. He calmly raised his wand and muttered, "Sleep, sleep, sleep." One after another, more than 100 sleeping spells flew toward Gajeel. At last, the onslaught wore him down. His shoulders sagged, his eyelids closed, and he slumped into a deep, unshakable slumber. Magic resistance can withstand bursts of power, but it has its limits. Even the mighty fire dragons of our world, renowned for repelling spells, would yield if 100 wizards cast sleeping curses in unison. Quantity, after all, can overwhelm raw resistance. "Lucian, you actually put Ghost Gajeel to sleep," one of the onlookers exclaimed in disbelief. Carrying the unconscious Gajeel down from the battlefield, Lucian allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The 3 bystanders were still staring, jaws agape and eyes wide, unable to recover from the astonishing turn of events. You all know Gajeel Redfox, Spectre's S-Class mage, and you know Lucian mostly as the guild's miraculous repair wizard, never as a frontline fighter. Even Urza and the others only believed he was gifted with instant mana recovery and a repertoire of powerful support spells. In fact, it was Urza who delivered the final blow to Eligor. Lucian merely struck once, exploiting the moment her magic reserves ran dry. But today, seeing Lucian utterly overwhelmed felt like watching a father schooling his own son. Gajeel never found an opening to fight back, and the whole duel was over in 2 or 3 minutes. How could anyone not be shocked? Had they not faced him themselves, they might still chalk Gajeel up as overrated, but now they'd all felt the Iron Dragon's power firsthand. The 3 of them had barely managed a single attack before Gajeel shattered it without effort. That gulf in strength is something you don't forget. Lucian gave a modest shrug and smiled. You're reading it wrong. I'm nowhere near his level yet. Today's win was almost all luck. He waved his hand dismissively, but his calm tone did nothing to ease the others' astonishment. Lucian's intervention had been the deciding factor. Had his magic not been able to pin Gajeel down, the battle would have gone very differently. He dismantled Gajeel's defenses as effortlessly as Magneto once subdued Wolverine, because Gajeel's power is entirely metal-based. All his dragon-slaying techniques draw on metal, so when Lucian revealed a spell that specifically targets metal, Gajeel never stood a chance. If Lucian had aimed his magic at Natsu instead, it would never have had the same devastating effect. Really, I'm not making this up, Lucian said, folding his arms. My magic zeroes in on metal. You hit a metal user, you trigger my specialty, that's all there is to it. Lebby and the others exchanged skeptical glances, but Lucian simply shook his head. Fine, let's get him back to the dorms first. Then we'll have Mirajane find the guildmaster and figure out what to do next. This wasn't just another hit and run on an empty guild. An ace magician from the Phantom Guild had assaulted Fairy Tail's own wizards in broad daylight, and if Lucian hadn't shown up, Rai, Lebby, and the rest would have been in far worse shape. Such a blatant breach of the Magic Council's regulations couldn't be ignored. No one was going to let it slide. Lucian knew that Master Makarov would never let this slide. We have to find Mirajane, he said, eyes hard. We can't just pretend none of this ever happened. Rebby's fists clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. With a fierce cry, she leapt up and slapped the unconscious Gajeel in midair. I can't stand that smug face of his. Of course, it did nothing to him. Gajeel's body was like solid iron. Instead, a shock of pain shot through Rebby's hon. As she staggered back, sheepishly realizing she just dealt 800 points of damage to herself. Now it was 4 of them, 3 guild members and Panther Lily, hoisting the still-out Cold Iron Dragon and storming toward the Fairy Tail dormitories. This was their home, and Makarov and Mirajane were family. When you'd been wronged, there was only one place to go. South Exit Park sat just south of the guild lodgings. In under 10 minutes, they stood on the dorm's front steps. Lucian took charge. Salusuke, Dorair, get up to the boys' wing and tell Natsu and everyone else to come down here. Rebby, head to the girls' wing and bring Mirajane and Urza. We're not wasting another second. I'll hold the line here, Lucian ordered, and the 3 team members sprinted toward the dorms flanking the guild hall. Almost instantly, furious shouts echoed from both wings. Fairy Tail wizards, outraged by news that Rebel and the others had been attacked by ghost wizards, were charging downstairs fully armed. Sarasuk, you're the fastest. Fly to Lucy's place and tell Urza and the others to muster here at once. The rest of you, I'm off to find the guildmaster. We may be launching a full-scale operation tonight. Mirajane, normally the very picture of gentle kindness, snapped to attention as if stung. In a breath, a pair of demonic wings unfurled from her back and carried her into the sky, heading straight for the East Forest. Lucian watched her go, brows knitted in thought. He'd heard the midday gossip in the guild hall countless times, but it still surprised him. Mirajane, sweet, soft-spoken Mirajane, the gentle eldest sister whom Natsu and Gray were always teasing, was in fact an S-class mage. They say Lucian was once as powerful as Urza, an unruly rival who delighted in challenging her. But unlike the common transformation magic you see today, he wielded a far more fearsome art, demon takeover magic. By literally fusing his body with demonic power, he became a living weapon. Then came that disastrous mission where his sister was killed. Afterward, his entire demeanor shifted. Lucian renounced fighting, walked away from frontline combat, and now serves Fairy Tail's logistics division instead. Still, any guild member who witnessed the surge of power in his glare that day wouldn't be so quick to dismiss the old tales. The raw magical force he unleashed, if even a fraction of it were deliberate, could shatter most mages like glass. Nearby, someone whispered, "That's Phantom Gajiel. He actually attacked our Livy. Once she wakes, he's going to catch hell. I doubt even his own guildmaster will recognize him afterward." As Lucian slipped away, the rest of Fairy Tale bristled around the floating, unconscious Gajiel. Their knuckles itched to strike, if only pride and protocol didn't hold them back. After all, Levy McGarden was small, sweet, without a mean bone in her body. The moment she opened her eyes, they'd swarm to her defense, ready to make Phantom Gajiel regret ever crossing their little librarian. As the excitement in the hall finally settled, the male wizards of Fairy Tale swarmed around Levy. She'd always been popular, but tonight's victory had sent her reputation soaring. Rabbittooth, the guild's top information gatherer, shook his head in amazement and let out a low whistle. "Levy, I never thought you'd manage to beat Gajiel, the Ghost Guild's ace," he said with a relieved sigh. "Your league's stronger than you were before." Chapter 145, The Phantom's Conspiracy, Update 1. Most people would shrug off Iron Dragon Gajiel as just another name on the roster, but Rabbit Toothman, an expert in all things intelligence, knows the truth. Gajiel is rightly called the Phantom Ace Mage. His power rivals that of the four-element dragons, and his reputation is built on relentless, hard-won victories. Rumor has it he's taken on entire dark guilds single-handedly. Levy's face flushed as she hurriedly waved her arms. No, it wasn't us. We were no match for Gajiel at all. It was Lucian. Lucian handled him all by himself and rescued us." Instantly, every mage in the hall turned to Lucian, eyes wide with disbelief. They'd assumed that Levy and her two companions had coordinated their efforts to subdue an S-rank dragon. That was impressive enough, but Lucian defeating Gajiel in a one-on-one duel? It was like imagining Happy knocking out Natsu. Oblivious to the murmurs around him, Lucian stood quietly, his thoughts drifting back to those unsettling rumors about Mirajane. Even in victory, his mind was drawn elsewhere, proof perhaps that the greatest battles often raged within. "I said it was just luck. Do you believe me?" Lucian glanced around at the sea of expectant faces, then let out a helpless sigh as his cat-like claws slid free. He knew better than anyone that against an S-class mage like Urza Scarlet, his high-grade wand, assorted spells, and supernatural abilities might buy him a few precious seconds, but not much more. The chances of actually defeating her were slim to none. He understood that perfectly well, but there was no way he could explain it now, so he simply fell silent. The truth was, Lucian had no real measure for his own power. Growing up entirely within his guild, he'd never seen an S-class wizard other than Eligor. And compared to Urza, that mysterious death god seemed far weaker. What he didn't know was that Eligor's strength actually surpassed that of many S-class wizards across the land. Lucian's only benchmark had always been Urza, so he'd never fully grasped how formidable some of the other S-class truly were. He pressed his lips together and shifted uncomfortably on the flagstones. Every eye in the courtyard was fixed on him, waiting for an explanation he couldn't give. Luck, random chance, was the only story he could offer, and it sounded pathetic. Half an hour later, the tense stillness shattered as Urza descended from above, clad in her gleaming heaven's armor. In one arm she carried Natsu Dragneel, in the other Grey Fullbuster, both unconscious but unharmed. The courtyard fell silent, broken only by the soft thrum of magic radiating from her chest plate. Urza landed with the grace of a warrior born and fixed Lucian with a sharp, steady gaze. "Explain yourself," she commanded, her voice as calm and implacable as steel. Lucian inhaled, bracing himself. This was it. There was no more running. Happy skimmed through the sky with Lucy tucked safely beneath his wings, while Sarusuk burrowed swiftly through the earth below. 20 minutes later, Mirajane descended, carrying President Makarov on her back. The instant they landed, Makarov's glare was like lightning, and the raw magical power radiating from him threatened to shatter the air. "If it were only our guild hall they'd attacked, I might have let it pass," Makarov thundered. "But lay a hand on one of our children, and there will be hell to pay. All wizards of Fairy Tale, hear my command. Tonight we march against Phantom Lord. Assemble at once. Fairy Tale, move out!" The cry rolled through the assembled members like a tidal wave. Clad in their guild colors, they prepared to unleash every ounce of strength they had. Lucian felt a fire kindling within him. He'd spent countless hours in the library, memorizing names of spells and marveling over illustrated grimoires, but never had he seen magic in motion. Now, with the world's 10 holy wizards converging on the battlefield, he was about to witness powers so immense they could reshape the very earth beneath his feet. "President, wait. Let me read his memories first." Just as Makarov was about to order everyone away under his formidable presence, Lucian stepped forward and halted him. In all the years of uneasy peace, the Phantoms had never broken council rules so blatantly or attacked Fairy Tail without warning. Something didn't add up. Better to be safe than sorry, Lucian would use legilimency to uncover whatever lay behind Gajiel's actions. Against an enemy with power on par with Fairy Tail and greater numbers, caution was their best strategy. Makarov lowered his staff in surprise. "You, legilimency? You can read memories?" He knew how demanding such magic was. Memory-related spells required a rare, extraordinary talent. Apart from Master Glade, his undercover agent inside the council, the only mage renowned for this art was Thor, one of the Phantom's 4 elements. Never had he suspected Lucian possessed it. Lucian gave a steady nod. If Gajiel's mind holds any hint of a conspiracy or the true reason behind this assault, we need to know before it's too late. Makarov studied him for a moment, then reluctantly stepped aside. "Do it quickly, and be careful." Lucian closed his eyes and placed his palm just above Gajiel's temple. He reached out with his mind, gently parting the veil that shielded Gajiel's memories. Images surfaced, the Phantom Commander's intense council, hushed orders passed under dim lamplight, and Gajiel's own conflicted thoughts in the moments before he struck. Each fragment brought them closer to the truth behind the Phantom's shocking betrayal, and to the next move Fairy Tail would have to make. Lucian paused, watching Gajiel's chest rise and fall, and thought, learning every kind of magic can't hurt. With that, he reached out and dispelled the coma spell. As Gajiel's eyes fluttered open, hazed and weak, Lucian seized the chance to probe his mind. Soul reading. The words left Lucian's lips like a whisper. Moments later, Gajiel's memories flooded Lucian's thoughts, and Lucian felt his jaw tighten. So that's what's really going on. In the visions, Lucian saw that the Phantom Guild's assault on Fairy Tail was never about plunder or revenge. Their true objective was Lucy Heartfilia, the eldest daughter of the Heartfilia conglomerate, the richest family in the kingdom. Lucy had run away to avoid an arranged marriage her father had crafted for political gain. Her own father had secretly commissioned the Phantom Guild to seize her, believing it would force her compliance. But the guild's leader had darker ambitions. By holding Lucy hostage, he could blackmail her father into handing over the entire Heartfilia fortune, swelling Phantom's coffers and influence. And if Fairy Tail were wiped out in the process, so much the better. Lucian drew a steadying breath. Now that he knew the truth, he couldn't sit idle. The stakes had never been higher, and time was already slipping away. Chapter title, Roar of the Iron Dragon. When Gajiel came to, he found himself surrounded by a ring of Fairy Tail wizards. He tensed, ready to unleash his Iron Dragon magic, until President Makarov's enormous fist smashed him into the ground. "Boy, speak the truth," Makarov barked, his knuckles digging into the earth beside Gajiel's head. The blow knocked Gajiel back into unconsciousness. As the others hovered warily, Makarov turned his stern gaze to Lucian. "Did you uncover anything useful?" "Yes, sir." Lucian's voice was steady as he recounted the memory he'd extracted. A collective gasp went up the moment he revealed the truth. Lucy Heartfilia was the eldest daughter of the Lockhart conglomerate. Eyes widened, mouths fell open. No one could reconcile the bright, cheerful mage they knew with the heiress to one of the realm's richest families. Lucy's cheeks flushed crimson as guilt swept over her. "I'm so sorry," she murmured. "If I hadn't been so stubborn, the guild never would have been attacked." She glanced across the assembly, ashamed to think her lineage had endangered the friends she cherished most. Fairy Tail had become her home, and her companions meant everything to her. Lucian offered her a reassuring smile. "Don't blame yourself, Lucy. Those ghosts were drawn by your family's fortune, not by you personally. They'd have targeted the guild sooner or later." He paused, meeting her eyes. "Honestly, this whole Lucy incident was just the spark, The real fuse was lit long before any of us arrived. Around them, the tension eased. Even President Makarov's stern features softened as the guildmates exchanged thoughtful glances. The battle lines had been drawn, but now the true enemy, and the reason they'd all been called here, lay clearer than ever. Without Lucian around, you could just imagine Lu Dong, Liu Bei, and their cronies stirring up trouble. Sooner or later, a fight was inevitable. Natsu snapped his knuckles together, fire in his eyes. What are you talking about, Lucian? If they dare to mess with us, we'll just teach them a lesson. He flashed an excited grin, then paused, taking a closer look. But you don't really look like a young lady. Hey! Lucian bristled, cheeks flushing with irritation. At that moment, Happy, ever the supportive Exceed, raised a paw. And don't forget, the monthly support tickets are due at the end of the month. I've been working myself to the bone to gather enough votes. Lucian shot Happy a wry smile. I know. But first, let's handle these bullies. Then we'll worry about the rest. Together, the trio braced themselves for the clash that was sure to come. Chapter 146, Let's Fight. Second update. A roar of determination filled the Fairy Tale Guild Hall as every wizard in the room formed a protective circle around Lucy. Don't be afraid, Lucy, Urza said, her steel blue eyes unwavering. Fairy Tale is the strongest guild in Fiore. We'll shred those ghosts to bits. Protecting our eldest lady is a man's job, Natsu added with a fierce grin. Gray gave her a playful shove. I'm still counting on being the first to read your novel. Hang in there. Happy fluttered at Lucy's shoulder, tail swishing. You've got this, Lucy. We believe in you. Makarov Dryar, tiny in stature but colossal in spirit, strode forward, his white beard bristling with authority. He raised a gnarled hand and boomed. Lucy, ever since you joined Fairy Tale, you've been my daughter. No one, absolutely no one, dares to harm Makarov's child. Overwhelmed by their support, tears sprang to Lucy's eyes. Master, thank you, she whispered. But amid the relief, Lucy's voice trembled with worry. President, how do we actually get to Ghost's headquarters? Magnolia is too far to just run there. Before anyone else could answer, Lucian, one of the guild's newest wizards, cleared his throat. He met Makarov's gaze and spoke up. That's exactly the problem. If we sprint across the countryside, we'll arrive exhausted and easy prey. We need a better plan. He paused, scanning the determined faces around him. I have an idea about transportation. The hall fell silent, all eyes on Lucian as he prepared to unveil his solution. Lucian shaded his eyes against the morning sun as he walked beside Master Makarov toward the guild's headquarters. I heard the council has a spatial magic device that can teleport entire squads of wizards between cities, he said. Can Fairy Tale afford one of those? Makarov chuckled and shook his head. Lucian, we've barely been breaking even each month ever since Natsu and the others grew up. It's only thanks to you that our finances are back in the black. There's no way we could spring for a device that expensive. But don't worry, I've made arrangements with the mayor. He'll run a special train just for us, so everyone can rest and refresh on the way. Lucian gave a wry smile. A train would certainly do for now. He tucked that thought away. When he mastered alchemy, the first thing he'd create would be his own gate key. With another wave of his staff, Makarov signaled the departure. The members of Fairy Tale surged forward toward the train station, chattering with excitement. Even Mira Jane, still lounging from her last mission, hurried to join them. Makarov insisted she come along. He wasn't about to leave her alone at the guild where unexpected dangers might lurk. Together, they piled onto the private train, ready for whatever adventure awaited beyond the next horizon. Lucian glanced at the prostrate form of Gajeel, knocked out cold by Master Makarov, and realized the big guy had simply been hauled onto the train along with them. All the more proof they'd encountered a ghost. No sooner had the train chugged out of the station than Natsu's face went pale, and he began rocking back and forth, green at the gills. Lucian flicked his wrist, murmured a levitation spell, and gently lifted Natsu a few inches off his seat. The spell stilled the carriage's sway enough to ease his nausea. Lucian might have thought the rest of the team safe, until Gajeel, just coming to consciousness, slumped forward, clutching his stomach. He let out a groan. Dizzy. Something isn't right, Lucian muttered. He turned to Mirajane, who was sitting across the aisle, worrying over Natsu's condition. Mirajane, he asked quietly, Does Laxus get caresick? She shook her head. I've never seen him in a car. Whenever he travels on a mission, he just transforms into lightning and zips off at top speed. Lucian frowned. As Mirajane considered that, Master Makarov tapped him on the shoulder and beckoned him down the aisle. In a hushed tone, the old wizard confided, Laxus actually does get motion sick. I checked with some of my old friends. It turns out that all the legendary dragon slayers tend to be especially vulnerable to it. If you ever choose to follow that path, Lucian, be ready for a lot of puking on the road. Lucian swallowed. All the dragon slayers carsick? Every last one, Makarov confirmed, giving him a wry smile. It's a strange side effect of their power. As Gajeel slumped in his seat and Natsu floated uneasily, Lucian realized this journey was just getting started, and that even the greatest heroes could be felled by a simple bumpy ride. Lucian grumbled, what kind of strange weakness is that? Almost as soon as the thought passed his lips, he reconsidered, and decided it was hardly a problem. First, he could already fly, so skipping conventional transport wasn't an issue. Second, he'd soon learn apparition. Why bother with trains once he could teleport anywhere in an instant? And with so many magical worlds still to explore, he was confident he'd unearth a remedy for any lingering drawbacks. The express train hummed over iron rails, racing toward Ogu City, seat of the Ghost Ruler, its towers growing larger through the window with every mile. Lucian's spirits climbed in step with the speeding engine. Far to the northeast, in the oldest city of the kingdom, the Ghost Ruler's headquarters stood at the very heart of Ogu, an immense citadel of black stone battlements and narrow spires. Inside, Guildmaster Joseph sat at the head of a long mahogany table, surrounded by his 4 chief advisors. They waited expectantly for news of Gajeel's mission, a swift, surgical strike against the wizards of fairy tale. Joseph leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Once Gajeel returns, assuming everything goes according to plan, our next move will be. He paused, exchanging tense glances with his council. They all knew what the old master of fairy tale, Makarov, would do when word of this assault reached him. Tomorrow's dawn promised to bring a full-scale retaliation, and the true battle for supremacy was only just beginning. Here's the plan, the chairman said, his voice low and controlled. We'll send 2 of our elementalists to seize the designated target. Their job will be to draw Makarov's attention. While he's occupied, our air mages will move in for a covert strike, draining every last drop of his magic. Once Makarov is neutralized, the Holy 10, and by extension the entire fairy tale guild, will be wide open. And if the council lodges complaints, we'll simply point the finger at fairy tale, claim we were acting in self-defense when they attacked us first. By the time they realize what's happened, the guild will be gone. We'll have taken over the Lotfilia Consortium's fortune and severed their ties to the council. At that point, no one will be able to touch us. Alia, leader of the Elemental Four, wiped her tears away and nodded. Don't worry, Chairman. With Gajeel's strength backing us, as long as we steer clear of the S-class mages, everything will go off without a hitch. Joseph gave a curt nod. Gajeel may be arrogant, but he knows what's at stake. He won't risk anything he can't be sure of. Before anyone could respond, a thunderous roar shook the chamber from below. The Fairy Tale Guild has arrived. Joseph, come down and meet your death. Makarov. Joseph's eyes snapped open. He's here already? What's Gajeel thinking? He clenched his fist and issued new orders. Plans changed. I'll take on Makarov myself. Arya, stay hidden until I give the signal. The rest of you, concentrate on those fairy tale wizards once they break in. Far below, in a cavernous hall 10 times the size of Fairy Tale's own guild room, the phantom wizards who'd been leisurely drinking sprang to their feet. As the Fairy Tale mages poured through the doors, the hall erupted into chaos. Flame magic, purple Skynet, one phantom cry rang out, a meteor shower of violet fire streaking across the ceiling. Pipe magic, illusionary smoke iron fist. Another shouted, tendrils of fog solidifying into crushing fists. Bullet Maggie, see electric shock cannon, crackled a third, bolts of lightning lancing toward their targets. Painting magic, ambition's runaway. A painter waved her brush in bold strokes that leapt off the canvas as living beasts. Wooden model, shy love barrage, declared the final caster, miniature wooden knights surging forward in perfect formation. Lucian watched in stunned awe. He'd already seen Natsu's blazing infernos and Urza's lightning-fast requips, but never spells like these. Today, he realized he was witnessing the true breadth and the true danger of Fairy Tail's formidable magic. Lucian watched the battlefield and noted something striking. No single Fairy Tail wizard seemed overwhelmingly powerful, yet each displayed a distinctive ability that made them a force to be reckoned with. In the current skirmish, it felt as though every member could effortlessly defeat a dozen Spectre mages. Take Urza and Natsu, for example. When they unleashed their full strength, they moved like unstoppable titans, leaving no enemy standing in their path. Seeing this, Lucian finally understood how Fairy Tail, despite its relatively small roster, had earned its reputation as one of Fiora's most formidable guilds. They relied not on sheer numbers, but on elite talent and unrivaled resolve. Chapter 147, The Terrifying Holy Ten, Third Update. Lucian and Mage sat out the frontline fight. After Lucian explained to Master Makarov exactly how to take down Gajeel, the two of them were assigned to guard the unconscious Iron Dragon Slayer. Their orders were clear. Gajeel was living proof that the Phantom Lord Guild had struck first against Fairy Tail, and if the Phantoms tried to spirit him away, the Magic Council would launch a full investigation. Lucy and Happy, meanwhile, were equally sidelined. As a celestial spirit mage, Lucy's role in a pitched battle was limited to summoning her spirits, and if she was honest, most of those spirits had minds of their own. They tended to ignore her battle commands and go off on their own adventures, leaving Lucy no choice but to cheer from behind cover whenever she did manage to call them forth. And Happy, aside from ferrying Natsu through the air, offered precious little offensive power compared to even Lucy's bare-fisted punches. "Hit him! Hit him! Nice, Natsu! Stay sharp, everyone!" From their vantage point, Mage, Lucy, and Happy cheered on the Fairy Tail wizards as one after another of the Phantom Lord fighters went down under Natsu's relentless assault. Though they weren't the ones trading blows, their voices rang out loud and clear, proof that even the non-combatants could lift the guild's spirit in the thick of battle. "Urza, Natsu, Gray! After him! Don't let the guildmaster climb those stairs alone." Lucian barely had time to finish reviewing the battle results. He was trying to decide whose magic he should study next, when he saw Makarov casually swat away the ghostly wizards blocking his path and stride up the steps toward the second floor. He turned to Urza, Natsu, and Gray, who were still buzzing from the earlier skirmish, and shouted the warning. So far, neither Spectre's guildmaster Joseph nor his 4 elite elementalists had shown themselves. Lucian was almost certain they were regrouping on the floor above. Makarov was undeniably powerful, but Joseph was an S-class wizard himself, and if he and his elementalists set up an ambush, Makarov could be in serious trouble. A single defeat would tip the scales in Spectre's favor and wipe out all of Fairy Tail's hard-earned advantage. Fairy Tail simply couldn't afford to squander their momentum. Spectre boasted 4 S-class wizards. Fairy Tail fielded only 1 today. Mage was sidelined by her own fears, and although Natsu and Gray were formidable fighters, neither held an official S-class rank. Lucian gripped his staff, determination flashing in his eyes. They would reinforce the guildmaster, no matter what awaited them on that second floor. Lucian noticed that the wizards of Fairy Tail excelled at nearly everything, except controlling their tempers in battle. Their eagerness to fight often escalated skirmishes into full-blown melees, inflicting needless damage and casualties. What surprised him most was that Makarov, ordinarily so measured and composed, was the most impetuous of them all. Lucian knew he could have handed Gajeel over to the Magic Council immediately. The council would have punished him, and at worst, Lucian could have summoned both Mistogan and Laxus, adding 2 more S-class wizards to the fray. With 3 S-class mages on his side, the balance of power at the top would have shifted decisively in his favor. Yet Makarov had marched straight to his doorstep, confident enough to risk everything. Lucian suspected the old master's true strength surpassed even Joseph's, and that it was enough to level the playing field with the best of the Spectres. One thing was certain, this veteran of countless battles had to be S-class himself. Before the showdown, Lucian had already explained to Makarov why Gajeel had to fall. Now he merely watched, waiting to see whether the old master's confidence would be justified on the field of battle. Lucian's roar, magnified by his amplification spell, crashed through the guild hall like thunder. The shockwaves snapped Urza, Natsu, and Gray out of their battle trance, and they skidded to a halt before racing up the stairs. "We need to check on him," Urza barked. Seeing their cue, Lucian waved to Gajeel, then led Mira-Jane, Lucy, and Happy in hot pursuit. Downstairs, their allies were holding the line. Victory there was only a matter of time. Everything now hinged on the confrontation above. If Makarov fell, no amount of triumph below would matter. A single Saint Level 10 wizard could obliterate their entire force. Lucian bounded 2 steps at a time toward the second floor, just as Makarov's booming challenge reached his ears. "Joseph, explain yourself, or I swear I'll make you rue what you did 6 years ago." On the landing, a fierce 4-on-4 showdown was in full swing. Makarov squared off against Joseph. Urza fought Sol, Natsu dueled Usagimaru, Gray tangled with Juvia. Lucian swept the combatants with a quick glance, then froze. "Hold on, isn't someone missing?" he muttered. No sign of Arya, elemental lord of the 4 elements, flickered anywhere in the hall. Lucian's heart thundered. If she wasn't here, the balance of this battle could shift in an instant. What a waste. He's alive, and I actually admired him. Joseph's cold eyes flicked to Gajeel, now under Lucian's control, and realization dawned. He pivoted to face Makarov. "Spare me the lecture, Makarov," he spat. "You defeated me 6 years ago by sheer luck, and now you fancy yourself my superior? Today I won't just kill you, I'll annihilate every last wizard in Fairy Tale. When I'm done, your guild will be nothing but dust. Then the world will know the Phantom Ruler is the greatest magic guild of all." Makarov's expression remained unruffled. "Very well," he said quietly. "Then die." His arm surged with power as his fist swelled to titanic proportions, a force capable of leveling mountains. Joseph only smirked. "You think that can stop me?" He drew magic into his flesh, molding his own hand into a radiant, hardened gauntlet. With that, he charged forward, ready to collide with Makarov's devastating strike. Makarov's voice rang out like thunder. "Up there, if you value your guild's future, come and fight me in the sky." With that, he drove a massive fist through the ceiling and, drawing on his vast magical reserves, levitated until he hovered just above the shattered roof. Any seasoned mage could accomplish a simple hover without a formal flying spell, but Makarov wasn't afraid of Joseph's guild for their sake. He was worried about collateral damage. A battle on the second floor would rain debris and raw magic over the fairy tale mages at ground level. Joseph, now Lucian, only smiled. He had expected this move. Effortlessly, he gathered his own energy and rose after Makarov, the wind whipping around him. "I suspected you'd choose the sky," he said calmly. In fact, he'd already sent Arya to lie in wait above the guild, ready to spring her ambush the moment their duel began. Boom! Before a single spell was cast, the sheer force of their magical auras crashing together had already twisted the sky over the city. Roaring thunder, jagged forks of lightning, and a brewing storm that crackled with anticipation. Any ordinary mage caught nearby would have been crushed beneath that overwhelming suppression of raw power. Lucian, pressed against the plaza's marble railing, could hardly believe his eyes. He'd thought Urza was the epitome of strength, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for a pair of Saint 10-level wizards duking it out. "Dark beam!" Joseph's voice cut through the roar of thunder. In an instant, tendrils of pitch-black energy split into countless streaks, each one barreling toward their opponent. "Light array!" Makarov's counter was immediate. He traced elaborate symbols in the air, and a luminous glyph bloomed beneath his feet. From it erupted a searing wave of pure, holy radiance. Death storm! Light explosion! Black and white energies crashed overhead in a cataclysmic collision, each blast reverberating through every street and shuddering through every building. Lucian's heart pounded as the aftershocks rattled the plaza's stones. This was far beyond any duel he'd ever witnessed. Here, raw magic ruled with indisputable authority, and the 2 Saint 10 wizards were determined to prove themselves masters of both darkness and light. The city's inhabitants were jolted from their sleep, and spotting what looked like a clash between fairy tale and phantom, immediately fled. Chapter 148, Super Magic, I Want to Learn, 4th Update. It's true. Light magic's offensive power can be astonishing. Lucian couldn't help but marvel as he watched Makarov trade blows with Joseph, using nothing but light magic, without once resorting to giant spells. Early-stage light magic is celebrated more for its defenses, especially by those like Lucian who have mastered the 3 pillars of God, than for its attacks. Lucian himself had never given much thought to offensive light spells, assuming they were too weak. But today's display shattered that misconception. Every beam Makarov cast carried enough force to level a 100-meter cliff. Above them, the sky battle raged on as the Holy Ten's 3 elemental mages joined Urza to contest the heights. The 2 sides clashed in a dazzling whirlwind of fire, water, and lightning, and for a long moment it was impossible to predict a victor. Yet Lucian felt confident in Makarov's chances. After all, the old wizard hadn't even unleashed his ultimate giant magic. With that thought, Lucian turned his focus back toward the fierce struggle unfolding on the ground. Lucian hovered just above the wreckage-strewn battlefield, watching Urza rally Natsu and Gray against the 3 S-rank spirit elementals. At first, he'd planned to wait for an opening. He wasn't nearly strong enough to face an S-rank alone, though his support magic was top-notch. But as the fight unfolded, he realized he might not have to lift a finger. He'd been prepared for utter chaos. After all, these were S-rank ghosts. Yet Natsu and Gray, neither of them S-rank, were holding their own against Usagi Maru and Juvia, the 2 spirit sisters. The pair had clearly matched their foes blow for blow. Neither side dominated. Lucian felt a twinge of admiration. If Urza's team was this balanced, there was no need for his interference. His attention shifted to Urza's duel with the 3rd elemental, the rock-shaping phantom known as Thor. It wasn't a contest of equals, it was a massacre. Urza hadn't even bothered to change outfits. Her crimson armor gleamed as she cut through Thor's sandstone projectiles without effort. With a flick of her twin swords, she drove him back so mercilessly that he resorted to dissolving into sand just to evade her strikes. That should have finished him. Instead, Thor reached into her mind, weaving illusions of a handsome blue-haired boy and several frightened children. For a heartbeat, Urza's guard faltered as she grappled with these phantom figures. But even that stalled assault barely kept Thor in the fight. He remained on the defensive, never threatening to turn the tide. Lucian exhaled and drifted lower, curiosity overriding caution. If the S-rank spirits were this, watered down, as he silently muttered, then perhaps he really could learn something by sticking around. He wasn't needed to win, but he might discover how Urza and the others had managed to make short work of such formidable opponents. Lucian watched the guild hall, its tables piled high with orders, the air buzzing with chatter and laughter, when Mirajane slipped up beside him and spoke quietly. "The difficulty of S-rank missions has skyrocketed," she began. "For our safety, Master Makarov's been far stricter about who he promotes to S-rank these days. Frankly, with how strong Natsu and Gray are, they'd already earn S-rank status in almost any other guild." Lucian's eyes widened with understanding. No wonder Master Makarov sounded so confident about facing the Spectre's leader. He really does match them in raw strength. Mirajane offered a conspiratorial smile. "He's even stronger than Joseph, and Natsu and Gray can hold their own against the Spectre's top magicians. Urza could probably take on several S-rank foes at once. And that's not all. Laxus and Mistgun aren't any less powerful, and Gildarts is said to be nearly on par with Master himself, despite being away on a century-long assignment." Lucian let out an impressed whistle. With a lineup like that, calling Fairy Tail the kingdom's strongest guild isn't an exaggeration at all. Chapter 10, the final confrontation. Below them, the younger guild members fought with unbridled passion. When the dust finally settled, Urza Ferrier stood triumphant. She had shattered Thor's mental assault and felled him with a single decisive sword stroke. Almost at once, Natsu Dragneel and Grey Fullbuster overcame their opponents in a dazzling display of fire and ice. Lucian watched with a growing unease. One opponent was still missing from the fray, the last elementalist. It defied belief that the guild's strongest magic user would skip so critical a battle. High above the battlefield, Master Makarov Dryar finally stilled his staff and surveyed the scene. With a patronizing smile, he addressed the lone figure still standing below. "That's enough from me," he boomed. The juniors have earned their stripes. Now it's time to finish this properly, Joseph. Kneel and beg for mercy. This is your final warning. I'll count to 3. Joseph's lips curled into a mocking grin. Mercy? You must be joking, Master Makarov. I'm every bit as strong as Jin, and far more ruthless than you could ever imagine. A tense hush fell over the clearing. Lucian braced himself. Whatever Joseph had in store, it was clear the real battle was just beginning. You actually demanded that I kneel, and now you're the one begging? Joseph's furious laughter echoed as dark energy crackled around him. Soul-devouring, he snarled, thrusting his hands forward. From the shadows at his feet, 2 colossal black wraiths burst forth, their hollow eyes fixed on Makarov. 1, 2, 3. Makarov counted steadily. With each number, his calm only deepened. When Joseph refused to back down, Makarov raised his palms overhead. A radiant sigil flared between his hands, then exploded into a blinding magic circle that spread across the sky, bathing the city in pure golden light. Before the wraiths could reach their target, the light washed over them. The dark apparitions let out a high, keening shriek as they disintegrated into motes of gleaming energy. Joseph staggered backward, his face a mask of shock and rage. What kind of magic is that? Lucian, perched on a nearby rooftop, couldn't help but curse at the spectacle unfolding above the city. Down below, in the first-floor lobby of the guild hall, Natsu, Gray, and every other fairy tale wizard stood frozen, eyes wide with awe. None had ever witnessed a magic of such overwhelming brilliance, and none were likely to forget it any time soon. Mirajane smiled as she addressed the gathered crowd. This is the Guildmaster's greatest secret, an ancient super magic born of our first-generation leaders. It channels sacred light to vanquish darkness, destroying only those it marks as true enemies. Its name is Fairy Law, the legendary, unique super magic. Lucian's heart thundered in his chest. He had focused on light magic from the very beginning, building a solid foundation, and now he understood why Master Makarov had chosen light as his specialty. It was the key to passing down this original, peerless power. I want to learn it, Lucian whispered, determination shining in his eyes. Master, please be careful, someone shouted just as Makarov began to summon Fairy Law's brilliant glow. But before the light could fully coalesce, a hulking figure clad in green appeared at Makarov's side. His face was hidden beneath a tattered blindfold, tears streaking down his cheeks as he raised trembling hands. So sad, there's finally a flaw, he wailed. Airspace annihilation. A strange, green-tinged magic circle flared to life around him, and the air itself seemed to shudder at his command. Makarov had just begun chanting the fairy's law when his expression suddenly flickered, and the magic roiling through him collapsed. The glowing circle he'd traced in the sky winked out. Damn it, I let my guard down, he cursed under his breath. While he'd been locked in battle with Joseph, he'd never suspected another mage was lying in wait. If not for that split-second lapse, no ordinary spellcaster could withstand one of his blows. Joseph's face twisted in rage. He'd only just recovered from the backlash of the Goblin Law when he saw Arya's hidden strike land true. Finish him, he bellowed. Makarov had a terrifying reservoir of magic at his command. He couldn't be allowed to walk away from this fight. Chapter 149, Facing an S-Rank Mage, Part 5. Right away, President, Alia answered sharply. With a swift motion, she unleashed her deadliest spell. Death Space 0. A yawning void opened around Makarov, its writhing edges tearing at reality itself. The Guildmaster's eyes unfocused as his magic reserves were violently drained, and for a moment it seemed the spell would succeed. Then a golden blur shot through the chaos. Lucian, propelled by flying magic, crashed into the void's edge and seized Makarov's arm. In a heartbeat, he dragged the old man clear of the sucking darkness. Daring fool, Joseph snarled, his robes swirling as he summoned crackling black energy. You dare interrupt me? Before Lucian could react, 3 figures burst onto the field in unison. Urza Scarlet's armor shredded in midair and reassembled as gleaming black feather plate. Natsu Dragneel roared, his throat igniting with molten flame. Gray Fullbuster formed frost in his palm, shaping it into a crystalline cannon. Dragon's roar, Natsu bellowed, unleashing a torrent of fire at Joseph's flank. Ice form, cannon, Gray called, sending a shard of frost to intercept Joseph's dark bolts. Urza, sword drawn, advanced with silent precision, ready to exploit any opening. Joseph staggered, buffeted by fire and ice, his dark magic faltering under their combined assault. Seizing the moment, Lucian laid Makarov gently in Mirajane's waiting arms. The priestess knelt, already weaving healing spells to stabilize the guildmaster's battered spirit. For a brief, breathless instant, all six of them, Lucian, Mirajane, Urza, Natsu, Gray, and even Alia, stood united against a single foe. The air crackled with tension, each combatant poised for the next move. In the heart of Fairy Tale's courtyard, the battle against an S-rank mage was just beginning. Get the president to safety. Everybody, fall back. Urza, Natsu, and Gray formed a protective ring around President Makarov, but even together they stood little chance against Joseph, who had already burned through most of his magic in their earlier clash. Their only option was to shield Makarov and retreat, buying time for him to recover before confronting the ghost again. Mirajane hoisted the exhausted president onto her back as they hurried away from the fray. "Be careful of Alia," she warned Lucian over her shoulder. "You must stop her before she opens her eyes. The moment she does, her power will skyrocket, and none of us will be able to stand against her." Alia, the elemental lord, pressed her pursuit. Only Lucian possessed the unique ability to suppress such overwhelming magic, a talent that had turned the tide against Gajeel. Mirajane's eyes were sharp with urgency. "Don't let her see." Lucian's heart hammered in his chest. With a steady breath, he drew his wand. "Avada Kedavra!" He spun and unleashed the killing curse in a jet of green light directly at Alia. She braced to erect an air shield, but the spell struck faster than she could react. A cold dread seized her, and she flinched aside, narrowly avoiding the blast. Alia's eyes blazed as she steadied herself, wind whipping around her form. The battle was far from over, but Lucian had bought precious seconds for his friends to get Makarov to safety. Lucian's heart hammered. As an S-class wizard, he knew instinctively that a blast of that thick, emerald-green magic light would cripple him, even if it didn't kill him outright. He clenched his staff and shouted, "God's Edge without shadow." No sooner had he unleashed the Kadavra spell than he wove the incantation for God's Edge without shadow, an invisible, razor-sharp blade over a meter long. In the blink of an eye, the transparent sword hissed through the air, aimed straight for Alia's midsection. Had it struck true, it would have cleaved her in two. But Alia, leader of the four elements, was more than he bargained for. Even without opening her eyes, she poured every drop of her magical power into a single burst of force. The impact of Lucian's phantom blade met that surge head-on, and to Hia's shock, the attack was repelled. All that remained was a superficial gash, no more than a centimeter deep, across her stomach. Yet the blade's curse lingered. Dark magic seeped through the wound, keeping her bleeding and sapping her reactions. Alia staggered, a hint of crimson staining her robes, and Lucian seized the moment. His lips moved in a low chant as the air around him crackled with energy. He was already gathering the runes for his third spell, one designed to finish the battle once and for all. Lucian knew better than anyone that S-class wizards weren't felled by a couple of flashy spells. His first two attacks were nothing more than distractions to keep Arya off guard. The real blow lay in his third, subtle incantation, an ocular binding jinx. "Close your eyes," he called out. In the wizarding world, this blinding lash was infamous for subduing fire drakes and even employed by professors against basilisks. It did no lasting harm, but until the charm wore off, its victim could not open their eyelids, effectively blindfolded in plain sight. Stripped of her vision, Arya couldn't summon her full elemental might, and Lucian gained precious moments to hold the field alone. "My eyes!" Arya gasped, clutching her face as she stumbled back to put distance between them. Through trembling fingers, she glared at Lucian with no small measure of surprise. "I never expected you, a mere cat, to wield more than healing magic, but you really think robbing me of sight will stop me? Let me show you a cruel reality. Even blindfolded, I'm still the strongest of the four elementals." The air elementalist's voice echoes across the courtyard. He binds his eyes in dark cloth, not only to restrain the titanic magic coursing through him, but also as a form of training. Lucian's anti-magic barrier prevents him from unleashing his full power, but it can't touch the sorcerer's standard spells. With eyes closed, the elemental reads his opponent by the subtlest shifts in the air. "Let me save you, poor little cat." He thrusts both palms forward. In midair, glowing sigils flare to life, each one birthing a roaring cannon of compressed wind that hurtles toward Lucian. Armor spell, now! Lucian's wand snaps upward. He chants fiercely, and iron plating materializes around him in a protective shell. In other worlds, his iron armor spell always trailed the legendary 3 pillars of light. His old wand simply lacked the strength. But this realm's artifact thrums with raw magic, nearly 20 times more potent. His iron shell easily rivals the pillars. The wind cannons slam into the armor, rattling it so violently that fine cracks of light spider across the plates. Still, the barrier holds, unyielding, unbroken. Lucian's heart leapt into his throat. No, she's gone. He spun around, scanning the battlefield for Alia, but she'd vanished. Before he could react, a triumphant voice echoed from behind him. Now you'll taste the same pain as Makarov. In truth, Alia had cloaked herself in invisibility the moment she unleashed the air cannon. Now standing out of sight, she began weaving her next spell. Airspace destruction. A ring of arcane runes blazed into existence around her clasped hands. Sorry I deceived you, she whispered. But Lucian's fear vanished in an instant. Tapping into his psychic sight, he detected the faintest flicker of her intent. In a heartbeat, his form swelled and fur rippled across his skin. He had transformed into a 5-meter-tall supercat. Drawing on the raw power of a panda's strength amplified by giant magic, he reared back and brought down a massive paw. Alia never saw it coming. The blow connected with bone-shattering force, and she soared unconscious toward the guild below. Lucian, mind sharp, senses alive, stood triumphant amid the dust and echoing silence. Although the blow wasn't fatal, it stunned Alia. Her mind went blank for a heartbeat. Now! Lucian cried. He seized the moment, blasting her skyward with a surge of raw magic. No sooner had she been thrown off balance than he unleashed a dozen razor-sharp blades from his backpack. They streaked toward her like lightning. Alia's S-class mage defenses flared, softening the worst of the onslaught, but not enough to save her. Each blade drew thin lines of blood, and Lucian pressed his advantage, knowing that if she recovered, she would turn the tide. As she began to fall, he sent one final blade spinning through the air. Before she hit the ground, it sliced cleanly through her neck. Her head tumbled into Lucian's palm as her body crumpled at his feet. Alia was gone. Chapter 150, The Fierce Fire, First Update. Look what happens when you try a sneak attack on our president. Lucian's voice thundered across the arena, amplified by a roaring enchantment, just as Alia's body crashed to the ground. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. What they had witnessed was more than just a twist of sorcery. It was proof of an entirely different kind of power. To veteran mages, a superhuman ability is like a glitch in the magical network. It leaves no trace. Ordinary spells, no matter how cleverly concealed, always generate ripples in the ether, ripples that seasoned sorcerers can detect a mile away. Even arcane arts borrowed from distant realms still cling to the same system, betraying themselves with recognizable fluctuations. But magnetic manipulation, Lucian's hidden gift, produces absolutely no magical signature. When he unleashed it, there was no shimmering aura, no crackling energy, no warning whatsoever. That silent, invisible force struck Alia so swiftly and so cleanly that she never had a chance to raise a defense. Had Lucian employed his death curse or the divine edge shadowless curse in that final assault, the spell's fierce undulations would have telegraphed his move, triggering Alia's instincts to conjure a shield. Instead, his superpower bypassed every safeguard, delivering a lethal blow without a whisper of arcane disturbance. Lucian stood over Alia's motionless form, his heart pounding. Even if his mind had gone blank in the heat of battle, he knew that only by masking his true power could he have toppled such a formidable opponent. Now the truth was laid bare for all to see. Magical prowess and superhuman ability were not the same, and in this conflict, Lucian's secret had utterly shattered their expectations. Lucian really did it. He killed Alia, the elemental queen of the 4 elements. Under Mirajane's command, a handful of fairy tale mages who had just fallen back from the Ghost Mage Guild watched in stunned silence. Lucian had faced Alia in single combat and emerged victorious. Their eyes went wide. He insisted he wasn't strong, that beating Gajeel was just luck, one mage whispered. Now he's taken down Alia too. There's no way that was luck. He's just too humble, another murmured. If Lucian keeps this up, we'll have a new S-class mage in our midst. Someone else said, "Good work, Lucian. You've avenged Master Makarov. I can finally breathe easy." The mages weren't celebrating Joseph's defeat. Far from it. Their true anger had been directed at Alia, who'd tried to assassinate their guildmaster, leaving him fatally wounded. Watching Lucian cut her down was a sight both shocking and deeply satisfying. But there was no time to gloat. Mirajane ordered them to press on, to keep fighting, and retreat when necessary. Even with Alia gone, Urza, Natsu, and Gray were barely holding their ground against Joseph. As one of the Holy Ten, his power was nothing short of terrifying. Lucian watched from the edge of the clearing as Urza, already legendary among the S-class sorcerers, struggled to hold her own against Joseph. Flanking her were Natsu and Gray, each a true S-class fighter, but even their combined might seemed barely enough to stave off defeat. All three were bloodied and panting. Most of Urza's black feather armor lay in broken fragments at her feet. "It's not an easy fight," Lucian murmured, recalling how he'd just dispatched Alia. He'd stepped aside now to see if the others could turn the tide, but the scene before him confirmed his fears. Even with his power added in, he doubted it would make a difference. Joseph stood unwavering at the center, shadowy tendrils of corruption winding around his form. His specialty was darkness and death magic, a lethal combination. His death spells might not outright slay a foe, but they left victims broken and helpless. As for elemental attacks or raw force, they would have to punch through the impenetrable sheath of dark magic armor he wore. Urza let out a battle cry and lunged, her greatsword tracing a fiery arc. But Joseph simply raised an arm cloaked in ebony energy and caught the blade with a single, resonant clang. He shoved her back effortlessly. Gray's ice blades shattered on impact with shadow flames. Natsu's roaring inferno flickered, then collapsed beneath icy spears that erupted from the ground. A heavy silence fell over the clearing as the three staggered to their feet. Lucian's mind raced. They were outmatched, and retreat was the only option. Yet Joseph's presence cut off any clear path of escape. He closed his eyes, breath slowing. There was only one choice left: unleash his most potent magic, the spell he'd saved for this desperate moment. If they were to survive Joseph's blockade, this was the only way. Lucian's grip on the spell was tenuous. If it detonated at full force, he risked destroying his own side. But if he could buy just enough time for Joseph to be held off and for his allies to retreat, that would be victory enough. He slammed his wand down, poured every last ounce of mana into the incantation, and roared, "Azure Flame!" Wild, untamed magic erupted around him. The wand's unique affinity for fire spells crystallized that raw power into a colossal dragon of brilliant sapphire flame. It reared back, scales crackling with energy, and lunged toward Joseph with a deafening roar. "Get clear!" Lucian bellowed. At the command, and at the sight of the towering flame drake, Urza shot into the sky on crimson wings. She swooped low and swept the battered Natsu and Gray behind Lucian's protective flank. Across the rubble-strewn field, Joseph's face twisted in fury. "Defeated by a cat, all of you trash!" Indeed, the Ghost Guild's ace mage was bound in chains. 2 elementalists lay beaten by opponents not even Yokai's S-class yet. Their leader, a legendary magician, had fallen to a mere fairy tale cat. It was nothing short of disgrace, and Joseph himself had been nearly killed moments ago by Makarov's ancient magic, held at bay only by 3 mages from fairy tale. No more. He clenched his fists, eyes blazing. Today, every witch and wizard of fairy tale would pay for this shame, and the Ghost Guild's honor would be restored. Lucian shouted the words of power, soul-devouring. Pouring every last ounce of magic into the spell, he unleashed the same devastating technique that had nearly slain Makarov. Instantly, 2 colossal black specters materialized before him, their gaping maws hungry for souls. They lunged at the skyborn blue dragon of flame that Lucian had already summoned, an entity more than mere fire, infused with a curse and uncanny awareness. At first, the dragon seemed powerless against the specter's vacuum-like pull. But the moment their darkness touched its cobalt-hot scales, the dragon erupted in rage. It reared back, opened its jaws wide, and snapped at the larger wraith. Its fangs sank into the shadowy mist, and the specter let out an agonized shriek. Magic crackled in midair as the 2 opposing energies stalled. Neither the vampiric black energy nor the fierce blue flames would yield. Their clash sent shockwaves through the courtyard, sparks rained down, and even the guild hall below burst into flame from the sheer force of their collision. Ghostly mages inside fled in terror, shrieking as they abandoned their seats. Joseph, watching from the sidelines, could only stare in astonishment. "How is this possible?" he muttered, disbelief etched across his face as the black apparition writhed in the dragon's burning grip. Neither spirit would relent, and the outcome remained uncertain, yet all who beheld it felt the tide of battle shift in Lucian's favor. Lucian stared in disbelief at the searing inferno roaring from the mouth of what looked like a mere house cat. He never would have guessed its fire magic could be so devastating. Nearby, Natsu's eyes blazed with excitement. "Amazing work, Lucian. Now's our chance. Let's charge in and finish him off. We'll avenge the president." At the sight of Joseph, writhing under the grip of that enormous blue flame dragon, Natsu was practically salivating at the thought of joining forces with the beast to strike the final blow. But Lucian held up a hand. "No," he called out. "Don't be reckless. Retreat for now. I can't control the dragon, and if we rush in, we'll only get burned ourselves. Our first priority has to be getting the president to safety and regrouping." Aluza flicked Natsu's ear, giving him an admonishing look, then scooped him and Gray into her arms. "Listen to Lucian," she ordered. Together, they turned and sprinted back toward the withdrawing fairy tale forces. Time and again, Aluza had learned to trust Lucian's instincts, and right now he was urging caution. As Lucian and the others vanished into the haze of smoke and flame, Joseph drew upon his formidable dark magic. With a violent surge of power, he wrenched control back from the blue flame dragon, sending its molten scales flaring out of sync. That creature's unpredictable wrath had proven just too dangerous to ally with, even against a common enemy. For now, there would be no victory here. First, they would live to fight another day. Even Juvia, newly roused from unconsciousness, could not smother the blaze with her water magic. All she managed was to divert the Inferno's fury, holding it at bay with sheer magical force. Around her, the courtyard was a riot of flame and shadow. "Everyone, assemble, get the mobile fortress online. We're moving out for the fairy tale stronghold." Joseph's voice crackled with dark mana as he strode to the center of the command tent. Black magic swirled around him, lending weight to his threat. None of them will escape this time. Thor, his face swollen from Urza's last blow, stumbled forward. "President, Arya's dead. Without her, the Jupiter cannon won't even power up." The president's eyes flashed. The Jupiter cannon, Fairy Guild's most devastating weapon, relied on the combined sigils of 4 elemental wizards to absorb ambient magic and unleash a supercharged blast. With only 3 of those wielders still standing, the cannon was effectively downtrodden scrap. Joseph snapped his fingers, darkness coiling around his arm. "I'm not an idiot. Slot Gajeel into her position. Sure, the power will dip, but it'll still fire." Outside the fortress walls, the clash continued. Fairy Tale's defenders fell back hastily. Lucian squared off against the assassin Alia, blades flashing, while Mirajane and the others formed a desperate shield around a powerless Makarov. The fate of the guild and the world hung on the next roar of the Jupiter cannon. It looks like the chapter text didn't come through. All I see is, naturally, no one cared about Gajeel. I want to work hard until the end of the month. Could you please paste the full chapter you'd like rewritten? Once I have the complete text, I'll be happy to turn it into a smooth, idiomatic English version featuring Lucian as your male protagonist. Chapter 151, The Man Who Wants to Become President, Second Update. On the return train to Magnolia City, the wizards of Fairy Tale gathered around their unconscious master, Makarov, like a flock of sheep without a shepherd. Their faces were drawn and their spirits crushed. Lucian, formerly known as George, watched them with growing concern. It was clear that while Fairy Tale's mages excelled at combat, they often struggled with strategy. He tapped his staff on the floor twice and then activated an amplified voice spell. "Listen up," he called, his voice booming through the carriage. Joseph won't give up so easily. Right now, he's rallying forces from every branch he can, hundreds of mages at least. If we move quickly, we might be able to strike him tomorrow morning before he's fully assembled. At Lucian's words, the wizards around him stiffened, a new seriousness settling over them. Makarov's absence left them vulnerable, and the idea of facing Joseph's combined might struck fear into their hearts. Lucian held up a hand to calm them. Here's my plan. 1. First, we have to heal Makarov and restore his magic as soon as possible. Without him, none of this matters. 2. Second, once we're back in Magnolia, we fortify the guild hall. Build barriers, set traps, and deploy every defensive magic item we have. 3. Finally, we prepare for a preemptive strike at dawn. If Joseph thinks we're cornered, he'll press his advantage. He paused, scanning each weary face. We still have time. We can do this, if we work together and act decisively. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Though their master lay unconscious, their resolve was not. With Lucian's plan in hand, the wizards of Fairy Tale steeled themselves for the battle to come. Lucian laid out the plan in clear, decisive terms. First, we must report this ghost attack on our guild to the council immediately. If they step in, it'll buy us the time Makarov needs to recover. Second, send summons to every mage in Fairy Tale, especially our S-class heavyweights, Laxus and Mistgun. If we can reach Guildarts, even better. And third, don't lose faith. Under Joseph's watch, we executed a clean retreat and even took down one of the enemy's elementalists. If we all pull together, Ghost and his allies won't stand a chance. At Lucian's words, Natsu exploded into flames midair. Lucian's right. What's there to fear? We're Fairy Tale, the strongest mage guild in Fior. Slowly, the other's anxiety gave way to confidence. Yes, Makarov had been struck down and stripped of his magic, but that didn't mean the guild itself was defeated. And one more thing, Lucian added. There's a healing mage named Barusica hiding out in the eastern forest. She's famous for her medical expertise and is a close friend of the guildmaster. If anyone can mend his wounds, it's her. We can send the master there for treatment, Urza offered, her tone firm. Barusica can definitely heal him. She touched the corner of her right eye, a flawless prosthetic Barusica had crafted when Urza first joined Fairy Tale and lost her original. Thanks to powerful restoration magic, it looked and felt just like a living eye. The only drawback was that it couldn't shed tears. Lucian nodded. Excellent. As soon as we get back to the guild, I'll have the master sent straight to Barusica. Mirajane spoke up. Once we're in Magnolia, I'll write immediately to Counselor Yajima at the Magic Council. He used to be one of our own and one of the master's oldest friends. He's been championing our cause there. And I'll use the crystal ball to contact Laxus and the Thunder God tribe, urge them to return at once. That settles it, Urza said, a determined smile on her face. We've covered every angle. Lucian rose to his feet and addressed the assembled wizards of Fairy Tale. His golden eyes gleamed as he raised a paw. We'll train relentlessly for the coming war, he proclaimed, and we won't rest until the Ghost Ruler's mages are so thoroughly defeated they quake in their boots. A thunderous cheer shook the guild hall. Rizah tightened her gauntlet with a determined nod. Natsu let out a rallying roar. Gray cracked a confident grin, and Happy flipped through the air, his tail twitching in excitement. Even Lucy, usually more cautious, clapped her hands and beamed. Mirajane watched with a soft sigh of relief. In an instant, Lucian's words had swept away doubt and replaced it with unshakable resolve. The despair that had crept into the guild after their last encounter vanished like mist in sunlight. As the excitement settled into focused energy, Lucian allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. His bold performance in the previous battle, combined with the strategic counsel he'd offered, had won him the full trust of Fairy Tale's mages. And now, as everyone broke off to resume training, he thought ahead. Once I master transformation magic and maintain my human form permanently, the path to Guildmaster will be within reach. Witnessing Master Makarov's casting of fairy law only strengthened my resolve. I will be the next Guildmaster, not for power's sake, but so I can learn that ultimate light magic and protect Fairy Tale with everything I have. Lucian stared out the carriage window as the train rumbled into Magnolia Station, his thoughts racing ahead of the locomotive. Becoming president of Fairy Tale wouldn't be as simple as winning a vote. First, he needed unanimous approval from every guild mage, a tall order, but nothing he couldn't handle. The real challenge lay a step beyond, mastering transformation magic well enough to hold his human form without faltering. Every guild president in Fairy Tail was expected to appear human at all times. If you couldn't sustain your human guise, you defaulted to the form you transformed into, Lucian's case, a sleek gray cat, each time you acted on the guild's behalf. A perpetual cat patron would be bad for business. It was a quirky quirk that simply wouldn't do for the guild's image. Mira-Jane Strauss had agreed to tutor him, but lessons hadn't yet begun. Transformation magic in this world came in 3 tiers. Primary transformation altered only your facial features and silhouette. Intermediate let you change your clothes along with your body. Both of those levels, however, cut your magical strength in half. Only at the advanced stage could a mage transform without sacrificing power. As of now, Lucian couldn't even manage a basic shift. His form remained stubbornly feline with every practice attempt. He sighed and checked his watch. Somewhere among the passengers were Artsak and Basika, the young couple from the western continent General Makarov had tasked with a mission in Bolyuska, deep in the eastern forest. Soon, all of them, Lucian included, would step off this train into Magnolia's bustling streets and face the trials fate had waiting. For Lucian, the real transformation was just about to begin. Lucian wiped a bead of sweat from his brow as he watched Mira-Jane send off another letter, her wand crackling with magic crystal-charged light. Each missive was an urgent plea for reinforcements, specifically Laxus and his elite thunder gods, to stand with them against the looming threat of the Phantom Ruler. Across the guild hall, Macau and Wakaba strode back and forth between the armory and the main chamber, hauling carts laden with enchanted shields, potion-laden satchels, and rows of sharpened elemental staves. Their footsteps rang on the stone floor, a steady drumbeat of resolve. Nearby, Libby had gathered every wizard capable of weaving defensive magic. Under his firm direction, they formed a ring of power that shimmered and stretched until it embraced the entire guild house. The air hummed with their combined will, reinforcing the walls against any assault. When the barrier was finally complete, Lucian found Natsu in the courtyard, fidgeting with a half-finished prototype. "Ready to test this?" Lucian asked, holding up a small metal orb etched with runes. Natsu grinned, sparks flickering at his fingertips. You know it. With a roar, he channeled his fire into the orb. It blossomed into a brief Nova B, blast that fizzled harmlessly against the newly erected shield. Satisfied, Lucian clapped him on the shoulder. "Good work. Get some rest. Everyone's exhausted." Around them, guild members began to drift off, heading for the baths or a corner of the common room to catch a nap before the storm. Moments later, Mira-Jane found Lucian in the lounge. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she sank onto a worn leather couch. "Lucian," she said quietly, "I just heard back from Laxus's crystal. He refuses to bring the Thunder Gods to our aid, unless Makarov steps down as guildmaster and hands the title over to him." Lucian's expression hardened. He'd known Laxus's pride ran deep, but this demand was outrageous. He leaned forward. "He thinks authority comes from force, not respect," he muttered. "Well, if that's how he wants to play it, he's about to learn the hard way what real leadership looks like." As Mira-Jane nodded, dabbing at her eyes, Lucian stood. The guild was ready, and come what may, Fairy Tail would hold its ground. Lucian's words drew approving nods from the other wizards around the table. "Our guild is in crisis," he continued, "and Laxus won't even come back to help. I certainly won't vote for him as our next master." In Fairy Tail, no amount of family blood can guarantee the presidency. Membership approval matters more. The second master earned his post by founding the guild alongside the first master, stepping in only after that master's sudden death. The third master likewise has no blood tie to his predecessor. He was chosen because he shared the same vision and had the full trust of the guild's wizards. As things stand, Laxus's arrogance and refusal to support Fairy Tail leave him with no realistic path to the presidency unless he genuinely changes. Chapter 152, Feeding the Fiery Flame, Third Update. "Where are Mr. Gan and Gildarts?" Lucian asked, pausing to think. Mira-Jane shook her head. "I still can't reach Gildarts. Ever since he departed for the northern continent, no one in Mistgun knows his exact location except the guildmaster. As for Mr. Gan, Representative Yajma has replied, the council is holding an emergency session right now, and as soon as they reach a decision, they'll dispatch someone to help." Lucian exhaled. "All right, We'll hold on. Whether it's waiting for the council's envoy or for the master to awaken, we don't have much choice." He nodded to himself, determined. Even though Laxus, Mistergan, and Gildarts were all currently unreachable, hope remained. If the council's response arrived before the spirit liaison, whom some whispered was delayed, then a rescue might still be possible. Just then, Alzak and Biska re-entered the guild hall. They had escorted Master Makarov into the East Forest and now hurried back with news. "Master Makarov's magic has suddenly vanished," Alzak reported gravely. "Porushika-sama says it's extremely dangerous for someone of his age to lose their power so abruptly, but she's already contacted Mistergan. He's on his way to help recover the master's magic." Lucian exchanged a look with Mirajane and Biska. Every second counted now. Whether through the council's aid or Mistergan's intervention, they had to act swiftly to restore their beloved master's magic and keep Fairy Tale's fiery spirit alive. By midday, the guild president was expected to make a full recovery. Relief washed over everyone as they finished lunch and settled in for a brief rest. Then a thunderous roar shook the building. Lucian sprang to his feet and dashed outside. Across the Great Lake to the south, a colossal, island-sized fortress was advancing on 8 enormous metal spider legs. High on its ramparts flew the unmistakable emblem of the Ghost Sovereign. "Everyone, fall back to your stations," Lucian shouted, voice ringing with authority. He wove an amplification spell in an instant, lending his voice supernatural clarity. "Activate your magic armor. Cast every defensive spell you know." Mages and warriors snapped to attention. Arcane barriers blossomed around the guild in overlapping layers, while every mage poured mana into gleaming suits of enchanted armor. Outside, the spider-legged fortress ground to a halt as its 8 mechanical limbs sank into the lake bed. With a hideous groan, a gargantuan cannon barrel slid forward from the fortress's hull, runes along its length igniting as it drew in a pulse of terrifying magic. The siege had begun. Lucian stared in disbelief at the massive moving fortress looming across the field, its enormous crystal cannon aimed squarely at Fairy Tale's guild hall. "This guy must be filthy rich," he muttered, eyeing the gleaming towers and arcane machinery. Building something of that scale and powering it with a magic crystal would have cost a small fortune. He ground his teeth and issued a swift command: "Reinforce our defenses." Immediately, the guild's defensive mages sprang into action. Gray spun his staff in a graceful arc, conjuring a colossal ice shield that rose like a frosty rampart. Behind it, wooden palisades and walls of compacted earth sprang up in perfect formation. Then, Urza stepped forward, her armor shifting into the legendary diamond plate. She raised her sword and invoked the diamond barrier, a prismatic dome of flawless, unbreakable light. For a moment, the air crackled with tension, then the crystal cannon discharged. A blinding beam of pure magical energy roared across the distance, aimed to annihilate the guild and every mage within its walls. Lucian braced himself as the light barreled toward them, ready to test the strength of their newly forged defenses. Lucian's eyes narrowed as the crystal cannon unleashed its searing beam. First, the magical barriers shattered, then every warded contraption, ice shields, plank barricades, earthen ramparts exploded in its path. Astonishingly, more than half the beam's power remained when it slammed into Urza's enormous shield. Even at 50% strength, the impact sent spiderweb cracks racing across its surface. "Restore to original state," Lucian called. He darted forward behind Urza and lofted his wand. A silvery glyph bloomed over the fissures, stitching them shut the instant they appeared. Crack, seal, crack, seal. Over and over, the repair spell eradicated each fracture as fast as the cannon inflicted it. By the time the crystal cannon sputtered and died, Urza's shield stood flawless. Her armor gleamed untouched, her magic reserves untouched. Lucian let out a low growl. That blasted cat's at it again. Above them, in the swinging gondola of his moving castle, Joseph leaped to his feet, scowling in disbelief. His first shot had failed, and now he would have to find a new trick. Lucian's teeth were clenched so tight his jaw ached. Every branch of Fairy Tale had been struck without warning. Its mages slaughtered before they could mount a defense. None could come to reinforce the guild, and Lucian's latest weapon had failed spectacularly. Even after reconfiguring the 4-element core into a 3-element Iron Dragon mode magic crystal cannon, the blast had fizzled into nothing. Rage flared in him. "Very well," he snarled. "If I can't destroy you with that, I'll drag you all down with hellish shadows." The crystal cannon required 15 minutes to charge, time Lucian would not waste. He stamped a foot, tracing runes in the air. "Dark ghost soldiers," he intoned. A swirling magic circle ignited beneath him, and dozens of spectral warriors poured forth, their ethereal blades slicing through the gap in Fairy Tale's ranks. Under that relentless assault, the guild mages struggled to form a unified defense. Once the cannon reached full power, their ruin would be complete. Lucian's eyes flicked to Natsu, who was readying his own magic. "We can't just stand here," Lucian called, voice low and urgent. "Help me take down that cannon." As ghost soldiers clashed with guild defenders, the crystal cannon's core glowed red beside Lucian. He leaned toward Natsu and whispered, "Its killing stroke isn't in the barrel, it's in the mage feeding it energy. Sever that link, and the whole thing collapses." Without taking out the magician supplying its energy, destroying the magic crystal cannon will be all but impossible, Mirajane said, her brow knit with concern. Lucian met her gaze steadily. "I know, but I have a way to blow the cannon, and possibly the entire moving castle, to bits." He swung his wand. A torrent of blue flame roared into being, but instead of lancing toward the Phantom Lord's fortress in Ogu City, it slammed into Natsu, who stood defending the Fairy Tale Guild in Magnolia. Mirajane stiffened. "Lucian, what are you doing? That fire is completely uncontrollable. If it keeps burning, it'll consume Fairy Tale and the entire city before it ever reaches the crystal cannon or that castle." A grim smile flickered across Lucian's face. "Exactly. I'm not trying to destroy Magnolia. I'm feeding the fire to Natsu." He raised his voice so the others could hear. "Natsu is a dragon slayer of fire. He can absorb and manipulate any flame. If anyone can handle this cursed blaze, it's him." He'd tested the tactic moments ago, simply unleashed the flame on Natsu alone, and the results had been promising. The fire's chaotic power would trigger Natsu's skills, allowing him to control and redirect it back at the cannon and even the moving fortress itself. Mirajane's eyes widened, then she nodded reluctantly. "All right, but hurry, before the city burns around us." Lucian brushed a lock of hair from his eyes and concentrated. The blue flame writhed on the wind, crackling toward Natsu like a living thing. And at the center of that inferno, the fire dragon slayer grinned, ready to show everyone exactly what he could do. After devouring the fiery flame, Lucian's magical reserves didn't just swell, they transformed. Now every spark he summoned took on the fiery flame's unique essence, responding to his will with razor-sharp precision. "Ha! Can you feel that power?" He laughed, raw energy crackling in the air around him. He poured the fiery flame deeper into himself, letting his mana surge beyond its normal boundaries. His grin widened. "First things first, let's clear out those ghost soldiers." Above the guild hall, Joseph's phantom warriors drifted in a ragged formation. They had no solid bodies, only the chilling aura of death magic, a scourge that gave most wizards nightmares. But Lucian's cursed fire could counteract their spectral nature, if only he unleashed it correctly. He drew in a long, steady breath, raised his fists to his lips, and called out, "Fire Dragon Slayer magic, roar of the fire dragon." A glowing blue magic circle spun into being around his mouth. Then, with a feral roar, Lucian expelled a torrent of sapphire flame so vast it blotted out the sky. The ghost soldiers shrieked as the cursed fire tore through them, extinguishing their dark forms in a single, overwhelming wave. Chapter 153, The Dried-Up Lake. Under the searing blaze of Lucian's fiery flame, the Phantom Legion collapsed into smoldering ash, their forms dissipating into the ether like dark smoke at dawn. "More! Don't stop now!" Natsu roared, his eyes alight with satisfaction. "This is the richest, most delicious flame I've ever tasted." Lucian offered him a steady nod. "As you wish." He drew a deep breath and thrust his wand forward. A ceaseless torrent of fiery flame gushed forth, a molten river of raw magic that Natsu greedily inhaled. Each pulse of heat only amplified the dragon's power. If his body could withstand it, Lucian knew he could unleash this torrent from sunrise to sunset, smothering every inch of the world in unquenchable fire and priming Natsu's next strike for unimaginable force. But suddenly, Natsu's triumphant roar turned to a strained grunt. His muscles trembled, and scarlet light danced violently along his scales. "No, too much power," he gasped, staggering under the surge. I can't control it. Realizing the danger, Lucian snapped his wand downward. The torrent of flame vanished in an instant, leaving only the afterglow of embers drifting lazily in the air. He lowered his weapon, concern softening his features as he watched Natsu slump to one knee, chest heaving with ragged breaths. The storm of magic had ceased, for now, at least, but the promise of their united strength crackled in the air, a living ember of power waiting for the next spark. Natsu, use brilliant flame. At Lucian's command, Natsu drew in a roaring breath and ignited two distinct fires in his hands, the crimson blaze of his own Dragon Slayer magic in his left, and the cerulean inferno Lucian had absorbed shimmering in his right. The twin flames writhed toward each other, coalescing into a single, gargantuan sphere of red and blue fire. Nearly 30 meters in diameter, the blazing ball hurtled toward the moving castle like a living meteor. Inside the fortress, Master Joseph stood flanked by the three elementalist mages, Gajiel, and the rest of the fairy tale wizards on duty. Their eyes widened in disbelief as the immense fire sphere, its heat palpable even from this distance, rushed straight at them. Outside of Makarov and Urza, none had ever imagined a dragon slayer could unleash such destructive power with the aid of a mere cat. You think you can destroy my moving castle? Dream on, Joseph bellowed. In a heartbeat, arcane energy spiraled from his body. He slammed his staff into the ground, and a dense barrier of crackling black magic erupted before the fortress walls, swallowing the brilliant flame in a storm of shadowy light. Phantom had spent decades saving up for the moving castle and the magic crystal cannon. Without them, he'd never have risked kidnapping the Lotfilia family's eldest daughter to recoup his expenses. He couldn't let his prized war machines be destroyed so easily. With that in mind, the three elemental wizards and Gajiel reluctantly broke off their attack on the crystal cannon. One by one, they activated their magic arrays, switching into full defensive mode. Boom! A colossal fireball slammed into the dark barrier surrounding the moving castle. The thunderous impact reverberated across Magnolia City, shattering the obsidian shield and every supporting enchantment in an instant. But the inferno, its power dozens of times greater than the spell that had slain the cursed demon, was largely deflected as well. When the dust settled, both the moving castle and the crystal cannon stood intact, though the heat was so intense that a quarter of the lake's water vaporized on the spot. Lucian watched from the ramparts, his expression calm. As expected of a Saint Level 10 wizard, he said quietly. Formidable, indeed. After watching Joseph and Makarov's clash, Lucian knew this attack wouldn't break through easily, but that was no reason to give up. If it failed once, try it again. If it failed twice, try it a third time, wear the opponent down. Natsu again, he called. Waving his wand, Lucian funneled a roaring inferno in to Natsu's maw. The dragon answered with a thunderous roar, hurling another massive fireball. The two conflagrations met above the lake, vaporizing half its water, yet the moving castle and the crystal magic cannon stood unscathed. When Joseph spotted a third fireball forming from Lucian's unending supply of flame, he could stay silent no longer. He intercepted the oncoming blast, shielding both fortress and cannon, but his eyes were grim. If this continued, their magic reserves would collapse. Why hasn't that cat run out of mana? He growled. Lucian said his magic regenerates instantly, someone whispered in disbelief. I didn't realize he meant this literally. Arusa and the rest of the fairy tale wizards gaped at Lucian's relentless barrage of fire. He appeared utterly untroubled, truly a mobile magic perpetual motion machine. Lucian swooped alongside his dragon mount as the massive mobile castle hovered above the lake. From its prow, Joseph's magic crystal cannon unleashed repelling gusts of wind to keep them at bay. But Lucian knew, as did his foes, that unless Joseph could overwhelm him instantly, the duel would grind the mage's reserves to dust. Enough of this, Joseph's lieutenant barked. We're burning through too much mana. Lower the castle, land, close ranks, and fight on the field. Below them, Natsu gripped Lucian's armplate so tightly his knuckles went white. The lake's placid surface shimmered, then boiled, as Joseph conjured a fourth colossal fireball. It plummeted in a roaring spiral, instantly vaporizing the water in a smooth, blinding sheet of steam. Even Joseph's brow glistened with sweat. One more shot at this magnitude, and his magic would collapse. Joseph made his decision. He ordered the cannon silent, the drawbridge slammed down, and he vaulted off the floating fortress with 100 knights in tow, racing toward the Fairy Tale Guild headquarters beyond the ruins. Lucian watched them vanish into the swirling mist and allowed himself a long, steady breath. At last, the fight would be on solid ground. Natsu's arms trembled beside him. He'd already absorbed more inferno than any fire dragon slayer should endure, every blast pushing him closer to his limit. If Joseph had held on to the high ground a moment longer, they would have been forced inside that castle's defenses, battling on his terms. But now the field was theirs. Lucian tightened his grip on the reins and turned to Natsu. "We'll take him down here," he said. Natsu nodded, flames flickering in his eyes. Together they charged forward into the dissipating steam, ready to end this duel once and for all. Although Natsu was down for the count, the enemy had already abandoned their mobile fortress and deactivated the magic crystal cannon. Everyone on both sides was nearly out of power. Joseph, the main linchpin of their defense, was stretched impossibly thin, tasked with guarding an area the size of that fortress. Lucian estimated the veteran mage was operating at no more than 30% of his true strength. All around them, Urza and the rest of Fairy Tale's wizards lay in ambush, the ground crisscrossed with concealed attack runes and trap glyphs. To Lucian's surprise, Joseph hadn't summoned reinforcements from any branch guilds. Only a handful of survivors from the earlier battle remained, a force vastly outnumbered by Fairy Tale's ranks. Urza raised her voice. "I'll keep Joseph busy. Everyone else, press the attack." In a heartbeat, she donned her black feather armor and strode forward to challenge the weakened core. Gray, fully charged, dashed in to face Juvia and Rabbit Maru, both exhausted from their previous duel. Elfman and Kana teamed up against Macau and Thor, and Lucian, heart-pounding, charged straight at the Iron Dragon, Gajiel. The battle plan was straightforward. Everyone would first take down the 3 elemental mages, the Iron Dragon, and the spectral and lesser spellcasters, and then rush to Urza's side to finish off Joseph. Fairy Tale was going to show him what it feels like to be crushed by the entire guild. "Why are you here again?" Gajiel snarled when Lucian charged him. He couldn't forget their standoff from the previous night, and he tried to retreat, only to find himself inexplicably suspended in midair, trapped by unseen magical binds. Lucian cracked his knuckles, wreathed his wand in shimmering energy, and muttered under his breath, "Faint plus 100. In an instant, he unleashed a volley of arcane daggers that sliced through the air. Gajiel convulsed under the assault and collapsed with a heavy thud onto the cracked lake bed. Without missing a beat, Lucian vaulted toward Thor, the earth elemental who was already reeling from a barrage of attacks. The battle was far from over, and Lucian was determined to turn the tide in Fairy Tale's favor. Chapter 154, Final Exam, 5th Update, Memory Reading. As Lucian charged, Thor's eyes gleamed with anticipation. He had trained his magic precisely for moments like this. By delving into an opponent's mind, he could unearth their deepest insecurities and manifest them as lifelike earthen puppets, twisted caricatures of siblings, lovers, children, even parents. Surrounded by these grotesque effigies of his guildmates from Fairy Tale, Thor knew the sight alone would shatter any resolve, leaving the target an easy mark for a fatal strike. But when Thor's probing tendrils of magic reached for Lucian's memories, they struck a solid mental wall. Every avenue of Lucian's thoughts was sealed by a powerful barrier. As Thor recoiled in surprise, Lucian seized the moment. With a soft incantation, Legilimency, he redirected his assault toward Thor himself. Lucian's eyes glowed as he unleashed his third-tier psychic discipline. In an instant, Thor's consciousness grew sluggish, his muscles heavy and his reflexes blunted. At the same time, all of Thor's earthen creations crumbled and dissolved into dust, leaving him defenseless against the next move in Lucian's mind-bending onslaught. "You bastard! You're only tapping into a fraction of the beast arm's power." Enraged at the mention of his late sister, Elfman's roar rang out as his right arm twisted and bulged, bones and sinew reshaping into a fearsome beast limb. With a single brutal punch, he sent Thor, still racked by Lucian's mind control, crashing into the earth. The impact knocked him unconscious. Lucian surveyed the scene and nodded with approval. "Nice work, Elfman. Now go help Gray." As Mirajane's younger brother, Elfman wields Beast Soul Takeover magic, allowing him to absorb the strength and traits of any creature. Though he doesn't quite match Natsu or Gray in raw power, he's still on the verge of S rank in a typical guild assessment. Lucian hustled Elfman, Kana, and the others toward Gray's position, and what they encountered was sheer chaos. During the Ghost Guild's recent attack, Juvia had fallen for Gray at first sight. Struck by love, she refused to fight him, even as battle raged around them. Yet her deep friendship with the fire elementalist Usagi Maru kept her from fully aiding Gray. The result was a bizarre three-way standoff, Gray clashing with Usagi Maru's legendary seven-colored flames, with Juvia desperately trying to keep either side from delivering a killing blow. But before Lucian and his reinforcements could step in, Gray's relentless ice magic had already prevailed. Usagi Maru lay defeated, his brilliant, multicolored flames extinguished by the frost. Juvia finally let her guard drop, signaling that she no longer wished to fight. By now, aside from Joseph, the Ghost King had virtually no magic users left on his side. Seizing the moment, Urza, who had been straining under the onslaught, found herself bolstered by the full force of the Fairy Tail Guild, led by Lucian and spearheaded by Natsu. Natsu's resilience was nothing short of astonishing. An ordinary mage would collapse after pushing past their limits and need 3 to 5 days to recover. Natsu had already regained most of his strength in mere minutes. Rallying behind him, the entire guild roared in unison, "We are Fairy Tail," and unleashed a relentless barrage of spells on Joseph, whose own magic reserves were dwindling fast. Spells of every variety rained down: ferocious close-quarters enchantments, precision long-range bolts, and devastating special attacks. Overwhelmed on all fronts, Joseph struggled to mount any real defense. But the most cunning of the Fairy Tail assault came from Lucian. Small in stature, he darted in and out of the fray, using the cover of his comrades to slip behind enemy lines. Sometimes his blows came cloaked in invisibility, like the shadowless curse of the Divine Edge. Other times they were lethal, precise strikes of the life-killing curse. And every now and then, he'd fan Natsu with an extra burst of flame to keep his fiery comrade in the fight. Together, Fairy Tail's unified assault pressed Joseph back step by step, proof that no matter how grim the odds, their bonds and tenacity could turn the tide. After 30 minutes of relentless fighting, Urza's final all-out strike sent Joseph crashing to the ground. Lucian had just seized control of Joseph's body with the Imperious Curse, but his magic reserves were nearly spent, leaving Joseph vulnerable to Urza's blow. "We did it! We won!" someone shouted. Fairy Tail's wizards, gasping for breath, burst into cheers as they stared down at Joseph, one of the 10 saints, lying unconscious and badly injured. Against all odds, and without the guildmaster or the 3 missing S-class mages, they'd followed Lucian's battle plan to perfection. Defeat Joseph and banish every last one of the invading ghost wizards. "Kids, you did an outstanding job," called a familiar voice from the edge of the clearing. The guild members turned to see Makarov smiling proudly at them. Unbeknownst to the team, he'd arrived just after Joseph led his ghostly forces out of the moving castle. But once he saw how smoothly Lucian marshaled their defenses, he held back, preferring to let them prove themselves before making his presence known. Now, with victory secured, Fairy Tail stood triumphant under the dusk sky, stronger, more united, and ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. Lucian felt a quiet satisfaction settle over him. He'd fully recovered, and if he'd wanted to, he could have ended Joseph's threat in an instant. Yet he hadn't rushed in. Even better, the younger mages had united to face what seemed like an unbeatable foe, and together they'd prevailed. After all, isn't that why Fairy Tail was founded in the first place? President! The moment everyone saw Makarov back on his feet and in high spirits, cheers erupted throughout the guild hall. Not long after, the Magic Council dispatched an investigation team to Magnolia to uncover the truth behind the conflict. Their findings were unequivocal. It was Ghost who'd provoked the war, and Fairy Tail had only defended itself. By the Council's verdict, Joseph, the domineering leader of the Ghost Guild, was arrested and the guild disbanded. As recompense for Fairy Tail's hardships, the Council awarded them 2 powerful assets, the Mobile Fortress and the Magic Crystal Cannon. Lucian had insisted Makarov fight for every scrap of restitution, and now both the fortress and the crystal cannon stood ready under Fairy Tale's banner, unbroken and once again in safe hands. As long as the guild can scrape together the funds to make a few modifications later on, that ship will become a formidable, large-scale mobile war fortress. Frankly, there's no reason to lean on the Magic Council. They contributed nothing. Fairy Tail single-handedly solved the entire crisis. After that battle, Lucian slipped back into a peaceful routine. Yet his dazzling performance had dramatically boosted both his popularity and his standing within the guild. Whispers ran rampant that he was already S-class material. Even Master Makarov began teaching Lucian each of his light magic techniques, one by one, perhaps to pave the way for him to master super magic. In any case, Lucian couldn't shake the feeling that Makarov was quietly grooming him to be the guild's next master. Meanwhile, in the parallel world of Hogwarts, Lucian was about to sit his first-year final exams. When at last the history of magic test was over, he leaned back in his chair and thought, that was almost too easy. Joining the stream of students pouring onto the sunlit quad, he let his mind wander over everything he'd experienced so far. When Lucian first arrived at the academy, he'd even considered tapping into the main world computer to cheat on his exams. By the time finals rolled around, though, he realized it was entirely unnecessary. These tests were simply too elementary for him. The moment he glanced at a written question, the answers sprang instantly to mind. The practical exercises were even simpler. He could make a pineapple tap dance across a desk, transform a mouse into a silver snuff box, or brew a forgetfulness potion without breaking a sweat. His effortless mastery wasn't luck. Lucian's original body and each of his clones had devoted hours every single day to rigorous study and arcane experimentation, far more than any other student. Their shared physical talents and combined experiences elevated him from prodigy to undeniable genius. Chapter 155, Destroying the Horcrux, revised. 3 days after the final exams, Gryffindor met Hufflepuff for the last Quidditch match of the term. Harry's stellar play, culminating in catching the golden snitch, sealed a narrow win for Gryffindor. Their triumph, however, wasn't enough to claim the House Cup. Earlier in the season, they'd fallen to Slytherin, and under Lucian's relentless drive, the Green team had swept every match. Add to that Professor Snape's generous awarding of extra points, and Slytherin's total became impossible to beat. When the numbers were finally tallied, the standings read: 4th place, Hufflepuff, 335 points. 3rd place, Ravenclaw, 352 points. 2nd place, Gryffindor, 353 points. 1st place, Slytherin, an astonishing 734 points. On the 4th day after exams, the castle's great hall was transformed for the year-end feast. Green and silver banners draped every wall, and a massive Slytherin snake loomed behind the head table, celebrating the house's triumphant return to the top after last year's defeat. As the students filed in, the air buzzed with excitement, and just a hint of envy. But tonight belonged to Slytherin, and especially to Lucian, whose unbeaten Quidditch season had carried them straight to victory. Lucian sat at the Slytherin table, the hero of the hour. As the first year who'd scored more points for his house than any other student, he couldn't help but draw every pair of green and silver eyes in the hall. When the feast began, Professor Dumbledore rose to his feet, beaming as he recounted the year's adventures, most notably Lucian's and Harry's brave efforts in the Chamber of Secrets. The headmaster lavished praise on both boys for helping to vanquish the basilisk, but he stopped short of the last-minute point swing that had famously snatched victory from Slytherin the year before. This time, the gap was simply too wide. No bonus could save Gryffindor. With a flourish, Dumbledore announced the House Cup winner, and Slytherin erupted in cheers. Exactly 1 week later, exam results went up in the entrance hall. Lucian's name topped the first-year list, while Hermione Granger once again led the second years. The very next morning, mid-June, the castle buzzed with summer excitement. Wardrobes stood empty, trunks were strapped shut, and notices fluttered through the corridors. Hogwarts was officially closed for vacation, and one ironclad rule went out with the news: no magic allowed until term resumed. Lucian had already heard the familiar warnings from older students, rumors of enchanted mischief and summertime disasters, but deep down, he knew better than to believe everything he'd heard. With a final glance at the castle towers, he hoisted his trunk and headed home for the holidays. Magic was still freely practiced in true wizarding hotspots like Diagon Alley and aboard the Hogwarts Express. Even in Muggle neighborhoods, the Ministry of Magic generally turned a blind eye to harmless spells, illuminating a room with Lumos, for instance, or cleaning a hearth with Scourgify. But anyone caught performing a fire-making spell, a transformation charm, or a cutting spell in full view of Muggles would be sure to receive a summons. Under Hagrid's guidance, the first years crossed the Black Lake in a little boat and stepped onto the platform at Hogsmeade Station, where the Hogwarts Express stood patiently waiting. This year, Lucian didn't take his seat with Ginny, Luna, and Neville. As one of Slytherin's most promising new students, despite his close friendships with Ginny and Harry, he was expected to spend his journeys among his own housemates. That came with its own advantages. The parents and guardians of these Slytherin first years were often well connected in the wizarding world, and conversation with them could yield scraps of information well worth knowing. Settling into his compartment, Lucian couldn't help but wonder what secrets and alliances this year might bring. Lucian watched as the Hogwarts Express eased away from the castle, its familiar turrets shrinking into the distance. Beyond the window, the magical landscape gave way to neatly trimmed hedgerows and orderly fields, the unmistakable scenery of the Muggle countryside. Small towns drifted past in a blur of brick houses and tidy streets, each one slightly more mundane than the last. By mid-afternoon, the students began shedding their robes. Lucian shrugged into a worn denim jacket over his school sweater, while the others slipped into jeans and t-shirts, eager to blend in. At precisely 4 o'clock, the train rattled to a stop at King's Cross, or, more precisely, at the hidden platform 9 3/4. This trip, only a handful of witches and wizards were returning to London, so the usual rush of departing students had dwindled to a trickle. Still, it took over an hour to disembark. A gaunt, wizened guard stood by the brick barrier, admitting only 2 or 3 travelers at a time. His job was simple: prevent anyone from charging through the wall all at once and alerting unsuspecting Muggles to the portal's existence. Lucian fell into step behind a pair of first years, crossed the platform in quick strides, and, heart-pounding with anticipation for the non-magical world awaiting him, stepped confidently into King's Cross Station. Lucian lingered on the platform as summer vacation began. Around him, young witches and wizards called out in eager goodbyes. "Lucian, come by my house whenever you're free this summer. I'll write to you. Don't forget to write back. Remember my number. Give me a ring whenever you like." One by one, parents arrived to collect their children. Even Harry was swept away by his detested aunt and uncle. When the last carriage had gone, Lucian stood alone at King's Cross Station. No one there to fetch him. His adoptive father in this world lay dead by Lucian's own hand, and so he remained unclaimed. Oddly, he felt no sorrow. He wasn't truly a child here, and the raucous chatter of the departing youngsters had always grated on him. A flick of his wand summoned the night bus, and soon he was speeding back to Nocturne Alley. Inside his cluttered shop, he tidied stray parchment and loosely stacked tomes before retrieving 2 prized relics: a tattered black diary bearing Voldemort's name and the long fang of the basilisk he had slain in the Chamber of Secrets. Back in his 5th year at Hogwarts, Lucian had succeeded in extracting almost every trace of the Dark Lord's magic from that diary. Failing to earn Voldemort's lasting trust afterward, however, had only deepened the Dark Lord's suspicions. Now, as he weighed those artifacts in his palm, Lucian allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He knew his next move better than anyone. Lucian had finally made up his mind. He would destroy the Horcrux. Carrying Voldemort's diary posed too great a risk. The Dark Lord's cunning was legendary. Any misstep could expose Lucian's secret, and if the diary were ever discovered in his possession, every covert action he'd taken would be laid bare. He settled the basilisk fang in his grip and reached toward the leather-bound book. Almost at once, the diary convulsed in his hand, spewing a torrent of black magic that struck out like living tendrils, intent on overwhelming him. Lucian only allowed himself a faint, disdainful smile. Focusing his will, he summoned the pure radiance of light magic. A halo of brilliant energy flared around him, cutting off the dark surge entirely. From the book's pages came a rasping voice, laced with fury. "You will regret it, you will regret it." Unfazed, Lucian drove the fang into the diary again and again. Each stab silenced a portion of its malignant power. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he called forth a controlled burst of fiendfire, its ghostly blue and orange flames dancing at his command, and pressed the fiery blaze against the wounded book. The enchanted pages curled, blackened, and crumbled into ash, the cursed magic consumed in the purifying fire. When the last ember died, Lucian exhaled and stepped back. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft settling of dust. Ahead lay 2 months of summer vacation, days he could spend holed up behind the shop counter, drilling charm after charm, or he could strike off on a new path. Surely there was more for him to do than simply practice spells in an empty shop. A plan was already forming in his mind. Since Lucian was no longer bound by Hogwarts' strict regulations, he finally enjoyed the freedom to pursue anything he wanted. He considered the possibilities, then tapped his finger against his chin and murmured, "This summer, I need to learn disapparition." He still remembered how helpless he'd felt facing Joseph. If only he'd been able to vanish the moment things went south. Next time he ran into an opponent too strong to beat, at least he could escape with a snap of his fingers. After all, even in the fairy tale world, wizards who can teleport are exceedingly rare. Chapter 156. Magic Crash Course, Second Update. Of all the spells taught at Hogwarts, apparition is by far the most challenging, and potentially the most dangerous. To even register for the course, you must be at least 17 years old and in your 6th year. During every practice session, a certified instructor stands by your side. A single misstep in an apparition can lead to splinching, where parts of the body are literally severed. When that happens, your teacher must instantly perform healing magic to reattach whatever you lost. An experience so traumatic that many students refuse to try the spell again. Once your lessons are complete, you must pass a rigorous practical exam. Only those who demonstrate flawless control earn their apparition license, the wizarding world's equivalent of a Muggle driver's license. Casting apparition without a license isn't magically detectable in real time, but if you're caught, the Ministry of Magic will impose a hefty fine. The school's strict ban on teaching first-year students in apparition serves 2 purposes. It keeps young witches and wizards safe and eases the workload on the Ministry's emergency magic reversal teams. Before these rules and the hefty penalties for breaking them were put in place, the reversal teams handled dozens of distressing cases each day. Muggle bystanders would stumble across dismembered or disoriented victims of botched, unauthorized apparition. Under normal circumstances, it would be all but impossible for Lucian to learn apparition in his first year. Yet he'd managed to sneak into the restricted section, where he'd uncovered both the incantation and detailed instructional texts. Still, mastering this particular branch of magic isn't just tricky, it's potentially lethal. A single mispronounced syllable could leave you separated from your own head, and with Lucian's build, there'd be no chance of miraculous recovery. He'd considered approaching Professor Snape for guidance, but Snape couldn't and wouldn't breach Hogwarts regulations to tutor a first year in such a dangerous art. It was a bitter irony. The very spells Snape had invented himself were fair game for unofficial coaching, but apparition remained strictly off-limits until 7th year. Lucian closed the forbidden book with a shaking hand. He would have to find another way to learn, or risk paying with his life. Lucian paused to consider the version of Voldemort trapped in the diary. After all, this was Tom Riddle as he had been in his 5th year at Hogwarts. He hadn't even begun to learn apparition yet. And even if the diary could teach him the basics, it would be utterly helpless the moment he attempted to teleport. There would be no one to catch his fall or mend any injuries. He toyed with a darker idea, abducting some unscrupulous dark wizard and forcing him under the Imperious Curse to act as his apparition tutor. But the more he thought about it, the less sense it made. Anyone under the Imperious Curse wasn't fully there. Their reflexes, their judgment, everything would be compromised. And if the whole scheme came to light, Lucian would find himself in Azkaban for the rest of his days. So he sifted through all the options again, and landed on the only one that felt both safe and permanent. He would pay for professional instruction. In fact, there existed in the Muggle world an underground crash course in magic, an extracurricular tutoring program quietly founded and staffed by a handful of highly respected wizards. That, Lucian decided, was exactly what he needed. These crash courses were set up to help two very different groups: the young witches and wizards who'd fallen behind at school, and adult graduates whose magic remained too shaky to land good positions. Unscrupulous instructors even sought out squibs from wizarding families, promising them arcane secrets if they signed up. Argus Filch, the school's grumpy caretaker, was one of their keenest prospects. He'd long nursed a secret wish to see if, for the right sum of money, he could finally wield real magic. Filch was certain that a fat enough payment would persuade any crooked tutor to break the rules and teach him how to apparate ahead of schedule. After all, if the Ministry of Magic ever found out, he'd likely only face a fine, hardly as severe as the punishments for the unforgivable curses. And with the ministry mired in scandal and red tape, who would care enough to pursue him? Lucian saw things differently. If bribery could get you in trouble anyway, why risk it? Better to stick to the proper lessons and hone his skills the honest way. With that decision made, he turned back to his studies, determined to master magic on his own terms. Lucian had spent the past few days poring over the disillusionment charm, a potent spell that rendered its caster invisible. After watching Arya slip behind Makarov's defenses and strike him unawares, Lucian became convinced that mastering this charm would give him a decisive edge in combat. Early the next morning, he set off for Ollivander's, bearing a selection of rare wand-making materials as gifts. Though he had no immediate need to craft his own wand, Lucian knew it was vital to cultivate good relations with the famed wandmaker. One never knew when such expertise might prove indispensable. Mr. Ollivander greeted him warmly, delighted both by Lucian's talent and by the exquisite supplies he'd brought. Leaving the shop, Lucian's eye caught a brightly colored poster plastered on a nearby wall. Magic Crash Course, enroll now. Intrigued, he followed the directions through the winding alleys until he arrived at a tiny, weathered storefront simply labeled Magic Crash Course. Nestled between a second-hand cauldron dealer and an ice cream parlor, it was easily the smallest instruction venue he'd ever seen in Diagon Alley, or even Nocturne Alley. Nevertheless, its faded sign promised an opportunity he couldn't ignore. Lucian pushed open the door and stepped inside. The cramped room was even smaller than he'd imagined, just enough space for a battered wooden table and 2 chairs. No more. Seated at the table, face down, was a woman in her early 30s, pale-skinned, her hair cropped short, and her jacket faded from too many washes. She lay sleeping so deeply that she didn't stir when Lucian entered. He paused in the doorway, stomach fluttering with second thoughts. This was the magic crash course he'd traveled so far to find. He wasn't sure he'd made the right decision. Swallowing his doubts, he approached the table and tapped his knuckles sharply against the wood. "Excuse me, ma'am, this is the place for magical tutoring?" At the sound of his voice, the woman jerked awake, blinking blearily before sitting upright. Her gaze snapped to Lucian with a mix of curiosity and alertness. "Yes, that's right. Are you here to sign up? My crash course is affordable, efficient, and guaranteed to boost your grades before the new term starts. No more being the laughingstock of your classmates." Lucian raised a hand to cut her off. "Just one question. Can you teach me apparition?" The witch's confident smile wavered. She studied Lucian from head to toe, her brow nodding in hesitation. "Apparition, you say? I could teach it to you, but are you old enough for that?" Lucian leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Once I'm old enough, I can learn apparition at school like everyone else. Why should I bother coming here now?" The witch behind the desk flushed and shifted in her seat. "We, only train adult wizards who've already failed their apparition exams and need to retake them. Under 17? Ministry rules bar you from practicing. It'd cost you a small fortune in fines if you were caught." He met her gaze steadily. She cleared her throat, embarrassment fluttering across her features. "Well, if you're not here for apparition, we do offer tutoring in other areas. Charms, transfiguration, all the way through the 7th-year curriculum. We can even help you tackle your school's holiday homework." Lucian smiled coolly. That sounds more useful. Chapter 157 Teacher Amy, Update. Lucian arched an eyebrow. If that's the case, forget it. I'll only learn apparition. With that, he spun on his heel, preparing to stalk out of the crash course. From the shabby shopfront and the instructor's threadbare robes, he'd already sized up the situation. This place was bleeding money. Summer magic boot camps like this typically attract only a handful of squibs or scatterbrained adult wizards who don't know any better, and even those tend to enroll in the big-name academies. A tiny outfit like this must be desperate to stay afloat, willing to take on anything that larger schools won't touch. Lucian had no real intention of leaving, of course. He was merely baiting the instructor. As he turned, he made sure the heavy cloth pouch bulging with gold galleons at his waist swung into full view. "Please wait, classmate." Before Lucian could take another step, a ripple in the air announced the witch's sudden appearance. One moment he saw the empty corridor behind him. The next, she stood directly in front of him, arms folded, blocking his way. "You and I can talk," she began, her voice measured, "but it won't come cheap." Her shop had been shuttered for 2 months now. If she didn't reopen soon, the rent would swallow her savings. Even with the school's busy season upon them, her little storefront never drew large crowds. Still, if this student, Lucian, was willing to pay more than her usual summer earnings in one fell swoop, the gamble might just pay off. Lucian's hand drifted to the bulging cloth pouch at his waist. The witch eyed it hungrily. "Not afraid of a fine, are you?" she prodded. He met her gaze, astonishment flickering in his eyes. Her apparition, so precise, so instantaneous, belied her diminutive stature and modest reputation. In his time at the academy, he'd learned that apparition skill varied wildly among witches and wizards. Masters like Dumbledore could vanish from one country and reappear in another as easily as drawing breath. A rare few managed to hop city to city, but most, even powerful practitioners, were confined to their own city limits. Yet here she was, materializing behind him in the blink of an eye. Lucian swallowed. He knew he held the leverage. If he chose to pay her price, he could secure whatever spellwork or contraband she hawked. But something in her confident stance and the sharp glint in her eyes warned him that this hag had tricks he hadn't yet foreseen. The corridor was silent, except for their breathing. The witch leaned in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tell me what you want, classmate. If your offer's good enough, you'll have what you need. But remember, no refunds." Lucian's fingers closed around the pouch's drawstring. He took a slow breath, steeling himself for the negotiation that could change everything. Lucian shook his head. Though the problem wasn't insurmountable, it would only take a few more practice runs. In theory, a wizard who apparated hundreds of times could cross an entire country in minutes, but most bodies simply couldn't handle that kind of strain. No self-respecting witch or wizard would subject themselves to it. The real hurdle, Lucian reminded himself, was speed. A typical wizard needs 2 or 3 seconds to vanish and reappear, a lifetime in combat, long enough to catch a dozen spells in the back before they even know what's happening. That's why ordinary apparition is fine for travel, but useless on the battlefield. Only the most skilled can shave that time down to under a second, allowing them to blink out of the way of curses and counterattack in a flash. Like Newt Scamander in Fantastic Beasts, he repeatedly apparated while dueling Grindelwald, never giving his opponent a chance to strike. And the witch who just materialized before him in less than a heartbeat was clearly in that elite league. She looked unassuming, plain robes, straight brown hair, but her sudden appearance was proof enough. She was a master of her art. She crossed her arms and met his gaze. "I can hand Lee the paperwork to avoid your fine," she said coolly, "but my tuition rate is 100 galleons. But let me make this perfectly clear," the witch's voice thundered like a lion's roar. "If you give up because you can't bear the pain of separation, there will be no refund." She folded her arms, eyes flashing. "And rest assured, I'm no charlatan. I served as an auror in the Ministry of Magic. My teaching is as tried and true as it gets." Lucian's face lit up at the mention of her auror credentials. He reached into the pouch at his hip and spilled out gleaming gold galleons. 100 galleons, agreed, he said, his voice steady. "Teach me to apparate properly this summer, and you'll have every last one." He watched the witch study the coins, then allowed himself a small, confident smile. He wasn't afraid she'd cheat him. What worried him was her skill level. Despite being only a first-year wizard, Lucian was far stronger than most students. He might not stand a chance against Dumbledore in a full confrontation. After all, he lacked the wand amplification of the fairy tale world, but ordinary wizards and even seasoned masters like Professor Snape posed little real threat. With his magic at its current level, a straight duel would likely end in his favor. Yet apparition was a different matter entirely, and that was precisely why he'd come. Lucian's abilities far outstripped those of any ordinary witch or wizard. Besides mastering the full range of British magical arts, he'd integrated fairy tale-style spells, unlocked genuine superpowers, and even his physique had become something out of legend. If this witch dared betray him, he could make her vanish as silently as his adoptive father had disposed of their enemies. Yet she'd just demonstrated her own formidable talents, especially in apparition, so he wasn't about to underestimate her. He only wondered how a once proud Auror had fallen so low. "Very well," he said, finalizing their deal. "Get your affairs in order and let your family know. We leave for Paris tomorrow." At the sight of the gleaming galleons, the witch practically salivated. Lucian raised an eyebrow. "Paris? France?" She nodded, licking her lips. "Yes, the French Ministry of Magic barely cracks down on illegal apparition. At worst, you get a formal warning. The American laws are even more relaxed, but it's so far away that travel and accommodation would cost a fortune. Paris is the most practical choice." Lucian studied the portkey notice again. A one-way trip from London to Paris, authorized by the Ministry of Magic, cost just 15 silver sickles per person. By contrast, a portkey to New York would set each traveler back 2 gold galleons. Paris clearly had the edge. His companion Amy had completed missions there before, even had friends who would put her up for free. She didn't know New York at all. "All right," Amy said, rolling up the parchment. "Let's leave tomorrow, and since I'm an orphan, I don't need to file any family notifications." Lucian nodded. Paris's more relaxed magical bureaucracy would be perfect for his studies, and he couldn't pass up the chance to explore Paris's famous Magic Street. Rumor had it that it dwarfed Diagon Alley and housed every rare spellbook imaginable. "Oh, by the way," he added, "I'm Lucian." "Amy," she replied, offering a pale, slender hand. "Before we go, I'll need a 20 galleon deposit, the remaining 80 when you've mastered your apparition lesson." "Consider it done." Lucian drew a small velvet pouch from his robes and dropped it into her hand. They agreed on tomorrow morning's rendezvous point just outside King's Cross. As Lucian stepped back onto the cobbled street, his heart thrummed with excitement. Paris, and all its secrets, awaited. Once Lucian was out of sight, Amy the witch muttered under her breath, "Do all orphans stumble upon fortunes like this? And why does he seem so familiar?" She scolded herself for overthinking and let the thought go. "Ha! I'm finally rich. Time to celebrate." She weighed her newly acquired gold galleons one last time, then bolted the door behind her. Whistling a happy tune, Amy made her way down the street to the leaky cauldron. Whatever happened next, at least she wouldn't be short of a good drink. Chapter 158, Trip to Paris, France, 4th update. Why do I feel more and more like him? Late that night, Lucian stood before his bedroom mirror, lightly tracing the planes of his face. Over the past year, ever since his body began to mature, he'd noticed something unsettling. His clone, his magical double, had started to look strikingly like his original form. He frowned. Was it simply because they shared the same genetics and enchanted abilities? He dismissed the thought almost at once. After all, his animal transformations, a sleek black cat and a lumbering panda, bore no resemblance to his human features. Perhaps it was just the odd quirks of magic. "Doesn't really matter," he muttered, shaking his head. Appearance never affected his power. Even if he ended up a perfect mirror image of the original Lucian, it wouldn't change a thing. Satisfied, he slipped under the covers and drifted off into a deep sleep. Tomorrow, he would leave for Paris. The next morning, Lucian rose with the dawn. After a quick breakfast, he tucked Paige safely into Mr. Ollivander's care and hoisted his suitcase onto his shoulder. His destination? The leaky cauldron, home to his friend Amy, who'd secured a long-term room there. With a last glance at the bustling inn, he stepped out, ready to begin the next leg of his journey. Lucian paused at the bottom of the narrow staircase, hefting his suitcase. The Leaky Cauldron's rooms were notoriously cramped, but thanks to Tom's annual lease, he could still charge far less than most inns. That's why Amy had called this place home for years. She simply didn't have the coin for anything better. Even as a former Auror, Lucian shook his head at her stubborn poverty. He climbed to the second floor, found the door number Amy had given him, and rapped sharply. "Amy, open up. It's Lucian. We need to leave." Tap, tap, tap. After what felt like an eternity, the latch clicked. The door creaked open to reveal Amy, hair tousled, eyes half-lidded. She blinked at him. "Oh, it's you. Is it already 8? Come in. Have a seat. I'll be out in a minute." She yawned and pivoted away, her upper body bare. Lucian let out an exasperated sigh and hauled his suitcase through the narrow gap. "I told you not to sleep without clothes," he scolded, settling onto a wobbly chair. Amy froze, one hand clutching a rumpled robe. Around them, discarded garments lay in riotous disarray. She offered him a sheepish grin. "Sorry," she mumbled. "I must have just collapsed after studying all night. Give me 2 minutes?" Lucian crossed his arms and took in the chaos. 2 minutes, he repeated firmly. "Then we're off." With that, he leaned back, determined to stay put until Amy was dressed, and they finally got out of this drafty old inn. Amy stepped into the room, towel in hand, and gave a rueful chuckle. "I had a bit too much to drink last night, and when I got home, I was roasting, so I just stripped everything off." She didn't blush or hesitate. Instead, she plucked her wand from the floor and began her morning routine of spells. First came the resuscitation charm to sweep away her hangover. Its gentle warmth banished every ounce of drowsiness. Next, she muttered a descaling incantation that left every surface gleaming. Then a displacement spell that gathered her scattered clothes and folded them neatly into drawers. With a final flourish, she summoned a crisp linen blouse and slipped it on in one smooth motion. In the space of a heartbeat, the room was transformed, orderly, bright, and refreshed. At the doorway stood Lucian, a first-year apprentice barely old enough to be out of his teens. He watched in silent admiration. To Amy, now in her early 30s, with porcelain skin and a figure at its most alluring, he was just a kid. She, ever free-spirited and unconcerned with convention, threw him a playful grin. "I'll just brush my teeth and wash up, then I'm off," she said, patting her hair dry. "Take your time," Lucian replied, his voice steady despite the flutter in his chest. He couldn't help stealing a glance, even knowing she saw him as little more than a boy. Lucian found himself struck by how effortless she was, how entirely at home in her own skin. After Amy finished packing, she hauled her suitcase down the stairs with Lucian in tow. They shared a simple breakfast, then apparated straight to the British Ministry of Magic. Every witch and wizard traveling overseas must register before departure, Amy explained, as they stepped into the marble-floored foyer. First, we'll head to the registration desk on the 6th floor in the Department of Magical Transportation. Then we'll go to the Portkey office to arrange your trip to the Ministry of Magic in Paris. Just so you know, the 100 gold galleons you paid only covers my teaching fees for apparition. Any other expenses you incur along the way are your responsibility. Lucian followed her toward the grand brass-trimmed elevator and smiled. "Don't worry. If I'm pleased with your instruction, I'll gladly add a 20% bonus to your fee." Amy reached out and grabbed his suitcase before he could shrug it onto his shoulder. "I promise you'll make progress. And you're still young. Let an adult handle your luggage from now on." Lucian chuckled, unfazed. "Thank you, Amy. Money's no object. Quality lessons are always worth the price." Over the past year, Lucian had been learning about magical creatures from Hagrid, discovering their habits and secrets. Armed with that knowledge, he regularly ventured into the Forbidden Forest to gather rare beast-supplied materials. Even without his adoptive father's inheritance, he could easily turn those finds into a small fortune in galleons. Money was the least of his concerns. Amy's attitude toward him had thawed noticeably once she realized how generous he was. Outsiders, seeing him lavish gold on her, naturally assumed Lucian was her biological son. On the 6th floor of the Department of Magical Transportation, Amy led Lucian through the departure protocol. A witch at the front desk caught sight of them, and her eyes widened in recognition. Amy, it's been ages. When did you have such a big son? She exclaimed. Amy waved her hand dismissively. He isn't my son. You know I've never even dated. Lucian's just one of my younger clients. The witch chuckled and patted Amy's arm. A client? Honest, Amy, you've outgrown that little shop of yours. The past is behind you. Focus on the future. Lucian raised an eyebrow at their banter, but said nothing. Amy finished the paperwork with a serene smile, and moments later they passed through the gates of magical transport, ready for whatever awaited them beyond the ministry. Lucian opened his mouth to keep pressing Amy, but she cut him off with a wave of her hand. Let's drop it for now and finish the paperwork. There are people waiting in line. He sighed and nodded. Fine, but when you're free, you should come by my place. 2 days earlier, the witch had simply shaken her head, then efficiently ran through all the necessary formalities for them. Once their documents were approved, Lucian and Amy made their way to the portkey office. During the short walk, Lucian resisted every urge to question her about her past. It didn't matter to him. He only needed Amy to teach him the apparition spell, not to pry into her history. Besides, she certainly wasn't going to volunteer any details. At the counter, the clerk glanced at their paperwork and called out, "Destination?" "In Paris," Amy replied. "French Ministry of Magic." The clerk handed them a small iron tower no taller than a candlestick, the words "French Ministry of Magic" etched along its base. With a nod, Lucian and Amy placed their hands on the cool metal. Almost immediately, a subtle force snaked around them, and the world blurred into a whirlpool of color and sensation. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went still. Lucian opened his eyes to a new chamber lit by soft golden sconces. Beside him, Amy stood with 2 well-worn travel bags slung over her shoulders. Lucian took a steadying breath. They had arrived. Now the real lesson would begin. "Not bad," Lucian said, brushing imaginary dust off his robes. "I didn't even feel dizzy the first time I used a portkey." Amy let out a soft sigh as she watched him steady himself. He'd only shown the slightest flicker of surprise on his face when they arrived, hardly the reaction she remembered from her own first portkey experience, when she'd been lightheaded for almost 10 minutes. She offered him a lopsided grin. "You're in remarkably good shape. So, where to next?" Lucian swept his gaze across the new surroundings, an open courtyard paved with cobblestones, ringed by ancient stone arches and creeping ivy. His exceptional health made portkey travel a minor inconvenience rather than a trial, but that didn't change the fact that the teleportation charm never felt entirely comfortable. Still, he was eager to press on. Let's head inside and see what we find. Chapter 159, What a Ruthless Person, 5th update. Next, we'll register. Then I'll introduce you to my good friend. She's an auror at the French Ministry of Magic. Her apartment is enormous, so we'll stay there while we're in Paris. Amy steered Lucian out of the ministry's key office, and they took the cage elevator down to the grand foyer. She led him to a marble bench by the entrance. "Wait here for a moment," she said, setting his satchel beside him. "I'll go greet her and fetch the spare key." Lucian opened his mouth to argue. He'd much rather check into a hotel on Rue du Sorcier. It was pricier but closer to everything. He could easily cover the cost himself, if only to stay within easy walking distance of Magic Street. But before he could voice his objection, Amy was already weaving through the crowd of aurors and clerks. He sighed and settled onto the bench. As long as his studies weren't disrupted, it really didn't matter where he slept. He had the funds. A night or two in a decent inn wouldn't strain his pocket, but he knew how determined Amy could be. Lucian rose and began to take in the ministry's grand hall, the high vaulted ceiling of stained glass, the polished marble columns with gilt capitals, the buzz of paperwork and low conversation. Aurors in dark cloaks strode purposefully past interns carrying stacks of parchments, while a few visiting wizards paused to consult official notices pinned to a large bulletin board. He smoothed his robes, took a deep breath, and returned to the bench. Any moment now, Amy would be back with the key, and then their Parisian adventure would officially begin. Compared to the heavy, antiquated decor of the British Ministry of Magic, the French ministry feels light-hearted and romantic, walls draped in delicate lace patterns, swirling Art Nouveau flourishes in every corridor. Half an hour later, Amy returned to the grand entrance hall with a decisive nod. "All right," she said. "Let's get out of here. There's a powerful anti-apparition ward inside, so we can't apparate from within. Once we're outside, I'll apparate us straight to my friend's house." "Lead the way," Lucian replied. His face was calm, but his eyes glimmered with curiosity. They stepped into the sleek, brass and marble elevator, a magical lift that descended beneath Place Furstenberg. As the doors slid open, they found themselves standing on the plaza's cobblestones, unaware that the entire ministry lay buried beneath their feet. "Apparition," Amy whispered, scanning the square to be sure no unsuspecting muggles were nearby. She took Lucian's elbow, and in an instant they vanished. When the world reformed around them, they stood amid the bustling crowds of the Champs-Élysées. Storefronts gleamed with window displays, and elegant trees lined the avenue. Amy smiled. "My friend lives just off here, on Rue Magique, Magic Street." Lucian's eyes widened. He blinked, taking in the chic boulevard and the discreet sign marking the hidden wizarding lane. "Magic Street? I never imagined it'd be right here." He shook his head, still in awe as they melted into the Paris crowd. Lucian followed Amy through the glittering crowds on the Champs-Élysées, which, in the magic world, masqueraded as a grand Muggle boulevard, to the hidden archway that led into Paris's magic quarter. In the Muggle eye, this was simply the most beautiful street in the world, but for wizards, it was so much more. The grand entrance to Rue de la Magie. Few ordinary witches and wizards could afford to live there. Rents were astronomical, and most residents owned shops or held prominent ministry positions. Even Mr. Weasley, a senior official at the ministry in London, lived miles away in Ottery St. Catchpole, Devonshire, a mixed wizarding Muggle village where house prices were far kinder to his ministry salary. Amy paused under an ornate iron archway, its filigree shimmering with warding charms, and glanced back at Lucian. "This is nothing like London's Diagon Alley," she said. Diagon Alley was established centuries ago, when magic users numbered only in the thousands. Back then, they didn't need or couldn't afford a massive shopping street. But here in Paris, they had the wealth and ambition to build a Rue de la Magie as grand as the Champs-Élysées. The layout even mirrors the Muggle Avenue, wide promenades lined with cafes, boutiques, and galleries. Only a small quarter of the buildings are shops, the rest are private residences. In France, most witches and wizards actually live right here on Magic Street, whereas in Britain, they're scattered from Godric's Hollow to the Highlands. She led him down a narrower lane, branching off the main drag, past storefronts displaying everything from self-stirring cauldrons to bottle-nosed bludgers. At the center of this alley stood a tall, slender statue perched atop a weathered stone pedestal. The bronze figure, a robed sorcerer brandishing a wand, gazed down at them with proud, iron features. Lucian felt the air hum with enchantments as he approached, senses alert to every flicker of magical energy in the carved glyphs that ran around the base. Here, he realized, the heart of Parisian wizarding life truly pulsed. Lucian stepped through the statue's skirt, just as a tricksy confusion charm scrambled the minds of its stone guardians. As the two sentinels reeled in dazed circles, the statue itself seemed to part open, its sculpted drapery lifting like a curtain, and slipped inside. Without hesitation, Lucian followed. He emerged onto a broad boulevard that could have been the Champs-Élysées, so familiar was its sweep of trees and grand storefronts, if not for one telling detail. Every shop front bore a magical twist. The ordinary pet shop had become an exotic menagerie for magical creatures. The public library now displayed shelves of bewitched tomes. The neighborhood apothecary had rebranded itself as a bubbling potion emporium. Even the cafe signs hinted at espresso served with a trace of levitation powder. As he surveyed the street, Lucian noticed that French wizards dressed almost exactly like Muggles. Elegant tailored suits, crisply polished leather shoes, no robes in sight. Unless they held wands in their hands, you'd hardly guess they possessed magical abilities. He contrasted this with memories of Diagon Alley back in England, where the wizarding staff at the ministry still favored dark, formal robes, and many older witches and wizards clung to traditional garb. Hogwarts students wore their black school robes every day, as did most of the teaching staff. The uniform code was strict, and the flowing wool gowns were a constant emblem of British wizarding life. Here in Paris, however, magic was cloaked in the guise of modern chic. Lucian slipped into the crowd, curiosity piqued by every enchanted display window. The city's sorcery felt seamlessly woven into everyday commerce, a hidden world riding atop the familiar avenues of La Ville Lumière. Wizard robes are Hogwarts' official uniform, but Beauxbatons School of Magic in France favors a more modern look, tailored blue jackets paired with long skirts. Because most French wizards live nearby, the neighborhood buzzes with life after summer break. Young Beauxbatons students stroll through the streets, and if you're lucky, you might catch an impromptu performance of the Fantastic Beasts in the town square. Amy led Lucian up the narrow stone stairwell of an old apartment building. On the second floor, she slipped a brass key into the lock and pushed open a door. Sunlight spilled into a spacious 130-square-meter flat, its 3 bedrooms, kitchen, bathroom, and balcony elegantly furnished in a European style. Lucian set down his trunk and took in the bright, airy living room. "This is fantastic," he said. Amy deposited his luggage in an empty guest room, then turned to him with a grin. "It's still early. Why not explore Magic Street? I'm off to find a pub and have a drink. Got to shake off the travel dust. Official classes start tomorrow." Just as she reached for the door, Lucian stepped forward and gently caught her arm. "Hold on, let's unpack first, then we'll go together." "I don't want you wandering off alone tonight." Amy laughed, rolling her eyes. "All right, Mr. Responsible, but you'd better stick to your word." "No, I'm not interested in visiting Magic Street right now. Let's begin the lesson." Daylight was perfect for magic practice, and Magic Street would still await them tonight. Besides, if Lucian mastered the apparition spell early, he could escape danger the moment trouble arose in any world. Amy glanced at him, surprised by his calm resolve, then gave him a thumbs up. "You're ruthless," she said with genuine admiration. They'd only met yesterday and spent half a day together, yet she'd already witnessed an astonishing level of composure and self-discipline in this 12-year-old boy. For the promise of gold galleons, Amy resisted her usual craving for a drink, shrugged off her coat, and pulled on a teaching vest. Apparition relies on 3 fundamentals: a clear target, unwavering determination, and absolute calm. She began. "First, picture precisely where you want to go. It must be specific, no hazy guesses." In truth, she still doubted he could learn the spell at all, but she would teach him just the same. Even if Lucian absorbed every ounce of theoretical knowledge, he still couldn't cast the spell. As a first-year wizard, his body hadn't yet matured enough to hold the vast reserves of magic required for a high-level charm like apparition. That was why she'd refused him in the first place. But she was running out of options, and Lucian happened to be outrageously wealthy, so, despite her reservations, she'd agreed to his proposal. She didn't consider it a lie. She would teach him every facet of the theory with all her heart. If his magic reservoir fell short when it came time to perform, that wasn't her fault. In a few more years of growth and training, his body would finally be able to channel the spell naturally. Chapter 160. Disapparition is easier than you think. Twilight draped the courtyard in dusky shadows as Lucian absorbed Amy's every word. Under her one-on-one guidance, he'd finally begun to grasp the subtleties of apparition that no textbook could teach. Amy recounted her own trials, failed jumps, close calls, the exact moments she'd learned to steady her nerves, and tailored her instruction to Lucian's pace, pausing whenever he looked uncertain. At last, she set down her wand and poured a glass of water to soothe her dry throat. "I know that was a lot to cover all at once. Are you with me so far?" Lucian met her gaze steadily. "I am. I'd like to try it, but if I get split, promise you'll fix me right away." "Absolutely," Amy replied, her voice warm but resolute. "Just remember the 3 Ps, place, pace, and poise. Visualize exactly where you want to go, move calmly, and keep your mind focused." He nodded, sliding his own wand free as the final sliver of sunset vanished below the horizon. He'd mastered every theory in the books, yet fear had always held him back, fear that a single misstep would leave him irreparably fractured. Tonight, though, he felt ready. With Amy standing by, he could trust himself to follow her advice. Lucian drew a steadying breath, fixed his eyes on an old iron gate at the edge of the grounds, and uttered the incantation. Time warped around him in an instant. The air whooshed past, colors stretched, and then Silence. He landed perfectly, knees bent to absorb the shock, heart pounding with exhilaration. Voice trembling, he turned to look at Amy. "It's so fast," he whispered, a grin spreading across his face. Amy stepped forward, her own smile shining in the moonlight. "Congratulations, Lucian. You've just made your first successful apparition." Together, they surveyed the gate he'd chosen, and in the quiet triumph of that moment, Lucian felt the boundless possibilities of magic opening up before him. Amy fixed Lucian with a patient look. "You do realize that even sixth-year students spend months studying theory before they ever set foot in a practice circle? You've only been at this half a day, and you claim you already understand everything I've taught?" She shook her head. "Mastering spells, especially advanced ones, takes time and patience. There's no advantage in rushing." In truth, Amy had hoped to stretch Lucian's lessons over 2 full months of theory before allowing him any hands-on practice. That way, she could legitimately charge him for 8 weeks of instruction, and he'd be too embarrassed to back out of the agreement once he'd already paid half the fee. But since Lucian insisted on trying straight away, she conceded. "Very well," she said with a sigh. "If you truly believe you're ready, we'll attempt it now. And if it fails, we'll know you need to strengthen your theoretical foundation. Either way, I won't lose those 100 gold galleons." Lucian simply smiled. He knew perfectly well that a first-year wizard's magical reserves were far too meager for something as demanding as apparition. After all, not even Tom Riddle, later known as Lord Voldemort, managed it in his first year at school. Lucian felt a powerful surge of magic inside him. Unlike most wizards, whose abilities only peak in adulthood, his strength was already immense. He carried not only the raw potential of his wizard blood, but also the mystical energy of the enchanted cats and the meditative power of the spirit pandas. Together, they made him more powerful than nearly ordinary adult wizard. He was certain that once he mastered this spell, he would perform it without hesitation. He had no patience for Amy's earlier reservations. 100 gold galleons was a small price to pay if she could help him overcome his apparition troubles. "You made the challenge," he reminded her with a confident smile. "A man's word is his bond." Amy's eyes brightened. She rose, picked up her wand, and waved it as if to cue his training. "All right, let's begin. We'll start with the basics. Apparate from the living room to your bedroom. Picture your room in vivid detail. Every piece of furniture, the light coming through the window. Then will yourself to be there. Believe it with all your heart. Doubt is the only thing that can stop you." Although Amy privately doubted Lucian could nail it on his first attempt, she maintained a professional seriousness. Every step of the apparition spell she explained clearly, demonstrating the precise movements and mental focus required. Lucian rose from the sofa, drew in a steady breath, closed his eyes, and began to wave his wand as he intoned the charm Amy had taught him. Apparition! A soft pop sounded in his ears, like an engine backfiring. For a moment, he felt as though he'd been sucked into a tight rubber tube, compressed for what seemed like an eternity, then abruptly expelled. When he opened his eyes again, he was standing in his own small bedroom. He allowed himself a triumphant grin. He'd done it. Apparition was surprisingly straightforward. His first attempt had been flawless. No splits, no jarring dislocations, nothing like the terrifying tales he'd heard. In practice, it was far simpler than most newcomers imagined. Of course, the real challenge for ordinary witches and wizards lies in forming a precise mental image of the destination. Many lack the memory or focus to conjure a clear picture of where they intend to go. Lucian, however, possessed third-level clairvoyance. Once he'd seen a place, he could retrieve it perfectly from memory, with no effort beyond willing himself there. Lucian's focus was so precise he could make out a single strand of hair in the projected image. That razor-sharp clarity is the first essential of this spell, perfect visualization. The second is unwavering determination, believing, without a sliver of doubt, that you can succeed. The third is absolute calm, never letting panic or fear take hold. Most of the other students trembled at the thought of mastering the apparition mantra. They'd heard too many stories of magicians splitting into 2 bodies, or, in the worst cases, simply collapsing and dying. During group practice, anyone unlucky enough to miscast would vanish in a flash, sometimes leaving 2 halves of themselves wandering the hall. How could they not be terrified? But Lucian felt nothing but curiosity. He was no ordinary fledgling wizard. He'd fought and killed across countless worlds. A transient split meant little to him, and even if disaster struck, it would only claim one of his clones. From his perspective, it was just another rite of passage, nothing to lose sleep over. Lucian met every requirement: ample magical reserves, solid theoretical grounding, and perfect focus. So when he uttered his first apparition, the spell took hold immediately. One moment he stood in the cramped bedroom, the next he materialized on the living room sofa. Amy stared at him, jaw agape. She simply couldn't believe it. Even the most prodigious first-year students barely scraped together enough power to make apparition work, and only after months of practice. How could Lucian possibly possess reserves comparable to a fully trained adult? She blinked herself back to reality. Talent or no talent, her fee was her fee. Scraping her thoughts together, she folded her arms and said, "Let me be perfectly clear. Mastering apparition early doesn't erase our contract. You agreed to pay 100 galleons for this lesson. I've only collected 20 so far. The remaining 80 are due immediately." "Don't worry," Lucian said coolly. "I've only mastered the basics of apparition so far. I'll still need your guidance to improve. And once I've perfected that, you can teach me other spells. You'll get the full 80 gold galleons I promised. And if your lessons are exceptional, I'll pay you even more." He spoke with an even detachment, but inside he was determined. Lucian didn't want a 3 or 4 second apparition like he had now. He aimed to match Amy's sub-second teleportation, the kind of speed you'd need in an actual duel. Today was the last day of the month, and he was resolved to make every second count,